Hello, and welcome back to Let's Play The Elder Scrolls III, Morrowind, Game of the Year Edition. Once again, it is story time, because Fedar found quite a bit of literature as he explored Hightown and Labortown in Balmora. Let's get started. On Morrowind, the Imperial Province, by Aramanwe of Sunhold. After the conquest of Hammerfell, Imperial legions massed along the northeastern borders of Cyrodiil, and invasion fleets prepared in Skyrim. Initially, though the Imperial legions and navy were widely considered undefeatable, House Indril and the Temple hierarchy proposed to resist to the death. Redoran and Dres stood by Indril, with Telvanni remaining neutral. Hlaalu proposed accommodation. Contrived border incidents in Blackmarsh ended inconclusively, but the swampy terrain did not favor legion and navy coordination. Against the legions massed west of Silgrad Tower and Craigenmore, and the legions west of Blacklight and Cormaris View, Morrowind had pitifully small militias stiffened by small companies of Redoran mercenaries and elite units of House nobles and temple ordinators and armigers. Further complicating matters was the refusal of Indril, Dres, Hlaalu, and Telvanni to garrison the western borders. Indril and Dres proposed, rather than defend the western border, instead to withdraw to the interior and fight a guerrilla war. With Hlaalu advocating accommodation, and Telvanni remaining neutral, Redoran therefore faced the prospect of standing alone against the Empire. The situation changed radically when Vivec appeared in person in Vivec City to announce his negotiation of a treaty with Emperor Tiber Septim, reorganizing Morrowind as a province of the Empire, but guaranteeing all rights of faith and self-government. A shocked temple hierarchy, which apparently had not been consulted, greeted the announcement with awkward silence. Indril swore they would resist to the death with the loyal support of Dres, while Redoran, grateful for a graceful excuse to avoid facing the legions unsupported, joined with Hlaalu in welcoming the agreement. Telvanni, seeing which way the wind blew, joined with Hlaalu and Redoran in supporting the treaty. Nothing is known of the circumstances of the personal meeting between Septim and Vivec, or where it took place, or the preliminaries which must have preceded the treaty. The public reason was to protect the identities of the agents involved. In the West, speculation has centered around the role of Zurin Arctis in brokering the agreement. In the East, rumors suggest that Vivec offered Numidium to aid in the conquest of the Altmer and Somerset Isle in return for significant concessions to preserve self-rule, house traditions, and religious practices in Morrowind. The Lord High Counselor of the Grand Council, and Indril, refused to accept the treaty and refused to step down. He was assassinated and replaced by a Hlaalu. House Hlaalu took the opportunity to settle some old scores with House Indril, and a number of local councils changed hands in bloody coups. More blood was shed in these inter-house struggles than against the Imperial legions during Morrowind's transition from an independent nation to a province of the Empire. The generals of the legions had dreaded an invasion of Morrowind. The Dunmer were widely regarded as the most dreadful and fanatic foes, further inspired by their temple and clan traditions. The generals had not grasped the political weaknesses of Morrowind, which Emperor Tiber Septim recognized and exploited. At the same time, given the tragic depopulation and destruction experienced by the other provinces conquered by Septim, and the swift and efficient assimilation of Morrowind into the Imperial legal systems and economy, with relatively small impact on lower or upper classes of Morrowind's citizens, the Tribunal also deserves some credit for recognizing the hopelessness of Morrowind's defense, and the chance of gaining important concessions at the treaty table by being the first to offer peace. By contrast, many Indril nobles chose to commit suicide rather than submit to the Empire, with the result that the house was significantly weakened during the period of transition, guaranteeing that they would lose much of their influence and power to House Hlaalu, whose influence and power was waxing with its enthusiastic accommodation of the Empire. The temple hierarchy more skillfully managed their loss of face, remaining aloof from political struggles, and earning the goodwill of the people by concentrating on their economic, educational, and spiritual welfare. And next we have Provinces of Tamriel. The Empire of Tamriel encompasses the 9 imperial provinces: Skyrim, High Rock, Hammerfell, Somerset Isle, Valenwood, Elsewhere, Black Marsh, Morrowind, and the ancient imperial province itself, Cyrodiil. Morrowind was among the last of the provinces to be integrated into the Empire, and because it was added by treaty and not by conquest, Morrowind retains exceptional power to define local law by reference to ancient Great House precedents. Skyrim, also known as the Old Kingdom or the Fatherland, was the first region of Tamriel settled by humans from the continent of Atmora, the hardy, brave, warlike Nords whose descendants still occupy this rugged land. Though more restrained and civilized than their barbarian ancestors, the Nords of the Pureblood still excel in the manly virtues of red war and bold exploration. Hammerfell is primarily an urban and maritime province, with most of its population confined to the great cities of Sentinel and Strosum Kai, and to other small ports among the islands and along the coast. The interior is sparsely populated with small, poor farms and beast herds. The Redguard love of travel, adventure, and the high seas has dispersed them as sailors, mercenaries, and adventurers in ports of call throughout the Empire. High Rock encompasses the many lands and clans of Greater Brittany, the Delise Isles, the Bjulse River tribes, and, by tradition, the Western Reach. The rugged highland strongholds and isolated valley settlements have encouraged the fierce independence of the various local Breton clans, and this contentious tribal nature has never been completely integrated into a provincial or imperial identity. Nonetheless, their language, bardic traditions, and heroic legends are a unifying common legacy. The Somerset Isle is a green and pleasant land of fertile farmlands, woodland parks, and ancient towers and manors. Most settlements are small and isolated and dominated by ruling seats of the local wizard or warlord. The isle has few good natural ports, and the natives are unwelcoming to foreigners, so the ancient, chivalric high culture of the Altmer is little affected by modern imperial mercantilism. Valenwood is a largely uninhabited forest wilderness. The coasts of Valenwood are dominated by mangrove swamps and tropical rainforests, while heavy rainfalls nurture the temperate inland rainforests. The Bosmer live in timber wood houses at sites scattered along the coast and through the interior, connected only by undeveloped foot trails. The few imperial roads traverse vast, dense woodlands, studded with tiny, widely separated settlements, and carry little trade or traffic of any kind. The Khajiit of the southern elsewhere jungles and river basins are settled city dwellers with ancient mercantile traditions and a stable agrarian aristocracy based on sugarcane and salt rice plantations. The nomadic tribal Khajiit of the dry northern wastes and grasslands are, by contrast, aggressive and territorial tribal raiders periodically united under tribal warlords. While the settled south has been quick to adopt imperial ways, the northern nomadic tribes cling to their warlike barbarian traditions. Most of the native Argonian population of Black Marsh is confined to the great inland waterways and impenetrable swamps of the southern interior. There are few roads here, and most travel is by boat. The coasts and the northwestern upland forests are largely uninhabited. For ages, the Dunmer have raided Black Marsh for slaves. Though the Empire has made this illegal, the practice persists, and Dunmer and Argonians have a long-standing and bitter hatred for one another. Morrowind, homeland of the Dunmer peoples, is the northeastmost province of the Tamrielic Empire. Most of the population is gathered in the high uplands and fertile river valleys of central Morrowind, especially around the inland sea. The island of Ardenfell is encircled by the inner sea, and is dominated by the titanic volcano Red Mountain and its associated ash wastelands. Most of the island's population is confined to the relatively hospitable west and southwest coast. Cyrodiil is the cradle of human imperial high culture on Tamriel. It is the largest region of the continent, and most is endless jungle. The imperial city is in the heartland, the fertile Nibene Valley. The densely populated central valley is surrounded by wild rainforests drained by great rivers into the swamps of Argonia and Topal Bay. The land rises gradually to the west and sharply to the north. Between its western coast and its central valley are deciduous forests and mangrove swamps. Tamriel is a big place. And the last thing Fedar's going to read from his inventory for now. The Book of Daedra. These are excerpts from this lengthy tome describing the nature of each of the Daedra. Azura, whose sphere is dusk and dawn, the magic in-between realms of twilight, known as Moonshadow, Mother of the Rose, and Queen of the Night Sky. Boethia, whose sphere is deceit and conspiracy, and the secret plots of murder, assassination, treason, and unlawful overthrow of authority. Clavicus Vile, whose sphere is the granting of power and wishes through ritual invocations and pact. Hermias Mora, whose sphere is scrying of the tides of fate, of the past and future as written in the stars and heavens, and in whose dominion are the treasures of knowledge and memory. Hirsine, whose sphere is the hunt, the sport of Daedra, the great game, the chase, known as the huntsman and the father of man-beasts. Malakath, whose sphere is the patronage of the spurned and ostracized, the keeper of the sworn oath, and the bloody curse. Mehrunes Dagon, whose sphere is destruction, change, revolution, energy, and ambition. Mephala, whose sphere is obscured to mortals, known by the names Web Spinner, Spinner, and Spider, whose only consistent theme seems to be interference in the affairs of mortals for her amusement. Meridia, whose sphere is obscured to mortals, who is associated with the energies of living things. Molag Bal, whose sphere is the domination and enslavement of mortals, whose desire is to harvest the souls of mortals and to bring mortal souls within his sway by spreading the seeds of strife and discord in the mortal realms. Namira, whose sphere is the ancient darkness, known as the Spirit Daedra, ruler of sundry dark and shadowy spirits, associated with spiders, insects, slugs, and other repulsive creatures which inspire mortals with an instinctive revulsion. Nocturnal, whose sphere is the night and darkness, who is known as the Night Mistress. Periite, whose sphere is the ordering of the lowest orders of oblivion, known as the Taskmaster. Sanguine, whose sphere is hedonistic revelry and debauchery, and passionate indulgences of darker natures. Sheogorath, whose sphere is madness, and whose motives are unknowable. Vernima, whose sphere is the realm of dreams and nightmares, and from whose realm issues forth evil omens. Especially marked for special interest under the heading Malakath, you find a reference to Scourge, blessed by Malakath and dedicated to the use of mortals. In short, the reference suggests that any Daedra attempting to invoke the weapon's powers will be expelled into the void streams of oblivion. Of the legendary artifacts of the Daedra, many are well known, like Azura's Star and Sheogorath's Wabbajack. Others are less well known, like Scourge, Makin's Hammer, Bane of Daedra. Yet though Malakath blessed Scourge to be potent against his Daedra kin, he thought not that it should fall into Daedric hands than to serve as a tool for private war among Caitiff and Forsaken. Thus did Malakath curse the device such that, should any dark kin seek to invoke its powers, that a void should open and swallow that Daedra, and purge him into Oblivion's void streams, from thence to pathfind back to the real and unreal worlds in the full order of time. And that's the last thing that Fedar's going to read from his inventory and storage right now. For everything else, he's got to head back out.
May I help you?
No. The next book Fedar wants to read is in the Western Guard Tower North, so that's where he's going. Here we go. Lady Benoch's Words and Philosophy. Lady Elena Benoch, former master of the Valenwood Fighters Guild and head of the Emperor's personal guard in the Imperial City, has been leading a campaign to reacquaint the soldiers of Tamriel with the sword. I met with her on 3 different occasions for the purposes of this book. The first time was at her suite in the palace, on the balcony overlooking the gardens below. I was early for the interview, which had taken me nearly 6 months to arrange, but she gently chided me for not being even earlier. "I've had time to put up my defenses now," she said, her bright green eyes smiling. Lady Benoch is a Bosmer, a wood elf, and like her ancestors, took to the bow in her early years. She excelled at the sport, and by the age of 14, she had joined the hunting party of her tribe as a jackspur, a long-distance shooter. During the Black Year of 396, when the Parik tribe began their rampage through southeastern Valenwood with the aid of powers from the Somerset Isle, Lady Benoch fought the futile battle to keep her tribe's land. "I killed someone for the first time when I was 16, she says now. "I don't remember it very well. He or she was just a blur on the horizon where I aimed my bow. It meant no more to me than shooting animals. I probably killed 100 people like that during that summer and fall. I didn't really feel like a killer until that wintertide, when I learned what it was like to look into a man's eyes as you spilled his blood. It was a scout from the Parik tribe who surprised me while I was on camp watch. We surprised each other, I suppose. I had my bow at my side and I just panicked, trying to string an arrow when he was half a yard away from me. It was the only thing I knew to do. Of course, he struck first with his blade, and I just fell back in shock. You always remember the mistakes of your first victim. His mistake was assuming because he had drawn blood and I had fallen, that I was dead. I rushed at him the moment he turned from me towards the sleeping camp of my tribesmen. He was caught off guard, and I wrested his blade away from him. I don't know how many times I stabbed at him. By the time I stopped, when the next watch came to relieve me, my arms were black and blue with strain. There was not a solid piece of him left. I had literally cut him into pieces. You see, I had no concept of how to fight or how much it took to kill a man. Lady Benoch, aware of this deficiency in her education, began teaching herself swordsmanship at once. You can't learn how to use a sword in Valenwood, she says, which isn't to say Bosmer can't use blades, but we're largely self-taught. As much as it hurt when my tribe found itself homeless, pushed to the north, it did have one good aspect. It afforded me the opportunity to meet Red Guards. Studying all manners of weapon wielding under the tutelage of Warday Acor, Lady Benoch excelled. She became a freelance adventurer, traveling through the wilds of southern Hammerfell and northern Valenwood, protecting caravans and visiting dignitaries from the various dangers indigenous to the population. Unfortunately, before we were able to pursue her story of her early years any further, Lady Benoch was called away on urgent summons from the Emperor. Such is often the case with the Imperial Guard, and in these troubled times, perhaps more so than in the past. When I tried to contact her for another talk, her servants informed me that their mistress was in Skyrim. Another month passed, and when I visited her suite, I was told she was in High Rock. To her credit, Lady Benoch actually sought me out for our second interview on sun's dusk of that year. I was in a tavern in the city called the Blood and Rooster when I felt her hand on my shoulder. She sat down at the rude table and continued her tale as if it had never been interrupted. She returned to the theme of her days as an adventurer and told me about the first time she ever felt confident with a sword. I owned at that time an enchanted daikatana, quite a good one, of Daedric metal. It wasn't an original Akaviri, not even of design. I didn't have that kind of money, but it served my primary purpose of delivering as much damage with as little effort on my part as possible. Acor had taught me how to fence, but when faced with a life-or-death situation, I always fell back on the old overhand wallop. A pack of orcs had stolen some gold from a local chieftain in Meditia, and I went looking for them in one of the ubiquitous dungeons that dot the countryside in that region. There were the usual rats and giant spiders, and I was enough of a veteran by then to dispatch them with relative ease. The problem came when I found myself in a pitch-black room, and all around me I heard the grunts of orcs nearing in. I waved my sword around me, connecting with nothing, hearing their footsteps coming ever nearer. Somehow, I managed to hold back my fear and to remember the simple exercises Master Acor had taught me. I listened, stepped sideways, swung, twisted, stepped forward, swung a circle, turned around, sidestepped, swung. My instinct was right. The orcs had gathered in a circle around me, and when I found a light, I saw that they were all dead. That's when I focused on my study of swordplay. I'm stupid enough to require near-death experience to see the practical purposes, you see. Lady Benoch spent the remainder of the interview responding in her typically blunt way to the veracity of various myths that surrounded her and her career. It was true that she became the master of the Valenwood Fighters Guild after winning a duel with the former master, who was a stooge of the Imperial battle mage, the traitor Jagar Tharn. It was not true that she was the one responsible for the Valenwood Guild's disintegration 2 years later. Actually, the membership in the Valenwood chapter was healthy, but in Tamriel overall, the mood was not conducive for the continued existence of a non-partisan organization of freelance warriors. It was true that she first came to the Emperor's attention when she defended Queen Aecorethi of Sentinel from a Breton assassin. It was not true that the assassin was hired by someone in the High Court of Daggerfall. At least, she says wryly, that has never been proven. It was also true that she married her former servant Erkin after he had been in her service for 11 years. No one knows how to keep my weaponry honed like he does, she says. It's a practical business. I either had to give him a raise or marry him. The only story I asked her that she would neither admit nor refute was the one about Calaxes, the Emperor's bastard. When I brought up the name, she shrugged, professing no knowledge of the affair. I pressed on with the details of the story. Calaxes, though not in line for succession, had been given the archbishopric of the One, a powerful position in the Imperial city, and indeed over all Tamriel where that religion is honored. Whispering began immediately that Calaxes believed that the gods were angered with the secular governments of Tamriel, and the Emperor specifically. It was even said that Calaxes advocated full-scale rebellion to establish a theocracy over the Empire. It is certainly true, I pressed on, that the Emperor's relationship with Calaxes had become very stormy, and that legislation had been passed to limit the Church's authority. That is, up until the moment when Calaxes disappeared, suddenly, without notice to his closest of friends. Many said that Lady Benoch and the Imperial Guard assassinated the Archbishop Calaxes in the sacristy of his church. The date usually given was the 29th of Sun's Dusk, 3rd Era, 398. Of course, responds Lady Benoch with one of her mysterious grins, I don't need to tell you that the Imperial Guard's position is as protectors of the throne, not assassins. But surely, no one is more trusted than the Guard for such a sensitive operation, I say carefully. Lady Benoch acknowledges that, but merely says that such details of her duties must remain secret as a matter of Imperial security. Unfortunately, her ladyship had to leave early the next morning, as the Emperor had business down south. Of course, I couldn't be told more specifics. She promised to send me word when she returned so we could continue our interview. As it turned out, I had business of my own in the Somerset Isle, compiling a book on the Sigic Order. It was therefore with surprise that I met her ladyship 3 months later in Firsthold. We managed to get away from our respective duties to complete our third and final interview on a walk along the Decetto, the great river that passes through the royal parks of the city. Steering away from questions of her recent duties and assignments, which I guessed rightly she was loath to answer, I returned to the subject of sword fighting. Friend our hunting, she says, lists 38 crypts, 750 offensive and 1,800 defensive positions, and nearly 9,000 moves essential to sword mastery. The average hack and slasher knows one grip, which he uses primarily to keep from dropping his blade. He knows one offensive position, facing his target, and one defensive position, fleeing. Of the multitudinous rhythms and inflections of combat, he knows less than one. The ways of the warrior were never meant to be the easiest path. The archetype of the idiot fighter is as solidly ingrained as that of the brilliant wizard and the shrewd thief, but it was not always so. The figure of the philosopher swordsman, the blade-wielding artist, are creatures of the past, together with the sword singer of the Red Guards, who was said to be able to create and wield a blade with but the power of his mind. The future of the intelligent blade wielder looks bleak in comparison to the glories of the past. Not wanting to end our interviews on a sour note, I pressed Lady Elena Benoch for advice for young blade swingers just beginning their careers. When confronted with a wizard, she says, throwing petals of cant leaf into the Decetto, close the distance and hit him hard. Okay.
Go ahead, Outlander. What do you need?
I need to leave. My next stop is Tiravel Manor. And we're going upstairs.
What do you think of Balmora, Outlander?
I think it has a lot of books. The Mystery of Princess Talara, Part 3, by Mara Lyketh. Norbooth was leaving his favorite pub in Camlorn, the Breaking Branch, when he heard someone calling his name. His was not the sort of a name that could be mistaken for another. He turned and saw Lord Errol, the royal battle mage from the palace, emerge from the darkness of the alley. "My lord," said Norbooth with a pleasant smile. "I'm surprised to see you out this evening, Norbooth," grinned Lord Errol with a most unpleasant smile. "I have not seen you and your master very much since the Millennial celebration, but I understand you've been very busy. What I've been wondering is what you've been busy doing." "Protecting the Imperial interests in Camlorn is busy work, my lord. But I cannot imagine you would be interested in the minutiae of the ambassador's appointments." "But I am," said the battle mage, "especially as the ambassador has begun acting most mysteriously, most undiplomatically lately. And I understand that he has taken one of the whores from the Flower Festival into his house. I believe her name is Gina?" Norbooth shrugged. "He's in love, I would imagine, my lord. It can make men act very strangely, as I'm sure you've heard before." "She is a most comely wench," laughed Lord Errol. "Have you noticed how much she resembles the late Princess Talara?" "I have only been in Camlorn for 15 years, my lord. I never saw her late majesty." Now, I could understand it if he had taken to writing poetry, but what man in love spends his days in the kitchens of the palace talking to old servants? That hardly sounds like molten passion to me, even based on my limited experience, Lord Errol rolled his eyes. "And what is this business he has now in... Oh, what is the name of that village?" "Umbington," replied Norbooth, and immediately wished he hadn't. Lord Errol was too canny an actor to reveal it, but Norbooth knew at the pit of his stomach that the battle mage did not even know that Lord Strel had left the capital. He had to get away to let the ambassador know, but there was still a game to be carefully played. "He's not leaving for there until tomorrow. I believe it's just to put a stamp on some deed that needs the Imperial seal." Is that all? How tedious for the poor fellow. I suppose I'll see him when he returns then, Lord Errol bowed. Thank you for being so informative. Farewell. The moment the royal battle mage turned the corner, Norbuth leapt onto his horse. He had drunk 1 or 2 ales too many, but he knew he must find his way to Umbington before Lord Errol's agents did. He galloped east out of the capital, hoping there were signs along the road. Seated in a tavern that smelled of mildew and sour beer, Lord Strail marveled at how the Emperor's agent Lady Brysiena always found the most public of places for her most private of conferences. It was harvest time in Umbington, and all of the field hands were drinking away their meager wages in the noisiest of fashions. He was dressed appropriately for the venue, rough trousers and a simple peasant's vest, but he still felt conspicuous. In comparison to his 2 female companions, he certainly was. The woman to his right was used to frequenting the low places of Daggerfall as a common prostitute. Lady Brysiena, to his left, was even more clearly in her element. "By what name would you prefer I call you?" Lady Brysiena asked solicitously. "I am used to the name Gina, though that may have to change," was her reply. "Of course, it may not. Gina the Whore may be the name writ on my grave." "I will see to it that there is no attempt on your life like at the Flower Festival," Lord Strail frowned. "But without the Emperor's help, I won't be able to protect you forever. The only permanent solution is to capture those who would do you harm and then to raise you to your proper station." "Do you believe my story?" Gina turned to Lady Brysiena. "I have been the Emperor's chief agent in High Rock for many years now, and I have heard few stranger tales. If your friend the ambassador hadn't investigated and discovered what he has, I would have dismissed you outright as a madwoman," Brysiena laughed, forcing a smile onto Gina's face to match. "But now, yes, I do believe you. Perhaps that makes me the madwoman." "Will you help us?" asked Lord Strail simply. "It is a tricky business interfering in the affairs of the provincial kingdoms," Lady Brysiena looked into the depths of her mug thoughtfully. "Unless there is a threat to the Empire itself, we find it is best not to meddle. What we have in your case is a very messy assassination that happened 20 years ago, and its aftermath. If His Imperial Majesty involved itself in every bloody hiccup in the succession in each of his 1,000 vassal kingdoms, he would never accomplish anything for the greater good of Tamriel." "I understand," murmured Gina. "When I remembered everything, who I was and what happened to me, I resolved to do nothing about it. In fact, I was leaving Camlorn and going back home to Daggerfall when I saw Lord Strail again. He was the one who began this quest to resolve this, not me. And when he brought me back, I only wanted to see my cousin to tell her who I was, but he forbade me." "It would have been too dangerous," growled Strail. "We still don't know yet the depths of the conspiracy. Perhaps we never will." "I'm sorry, I always find myself giving long explanations to short questions. When Lord Strail asked if I would help, I should have begun by saying yes," Lady Brysiena laughed at the change in Lord Strail and Gina's expressions. "I will help you, of course. But for this to turn out well, you must accomplish 2 things to the Emperor's satisfaction. First, you must prove with absolute certainty who is the power behind this plot you've uncovered. You must get someone to confess. And secondly," said Lord Strail, nodding, "we must prove that this is a matter worthy of His Imperial Majesty's consideration, and not merely a minor local concern." Lord Strail, Lady Brysiena, and the woman who called herself Gina discussed how to accomplish their goals for a few hours more. When it was agreed what had to be done, Lady Brysiena took her leave to find her ally Persecus. Strail and Gina set off to the west, toward Camlorn. It was not long after beginning their ride through the woods that they heard the sound of galloping hoofbeats far up ahead. Lord Strail unsheathed his sword and signaled for Gina to position her horse behind him. At that moment, they were attacked on all sides. It was an ambush. 8 men, armed with axes, had been lying in wait. Lord Strail quickly yanked Gina from her horse, pulling her behind him. He made a brief, deft motion with his hands. A ring of flame materialized around them and rushed outward, striking their assailants. The men roared in pain and dropped to their knees. Lord Strail jumped the horse over the closest one and galloped at full speed westward. "I thought you were an ambassador, not a mage," laughed Gina. "I still believe there are times for diplomacy," replied Lord Strail. The horse and rider they had heard before met them on the road. It was Norbuth. "My lord, it's the royal battle mage. He found out you 2 were in Umbington." "With considerable ease, I might add," Lord Errol's voice boomed out of the woods. Norbuth, Gina, and Lord Strail scanned the dark trees, but they showed nothing. The battle mage's voice seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere. "I'm sorry, my lord," groaned Norbuth. "I tried to warn you as soon as I could." "In your next life, perhaps you'll remember not to trust your plans to a drunkard," laughed Lord Errol. He had them in his sight, and the spell was unleashed. Norbuth saw him first, by the light of the ball of fire that leapt from his fingertips. Later, Lord Errol was to wonder to himself what the fool had intended to do. Perhaps he was rushing forward to pull Lord Strail out of the path. Perhaps he was trying to flee the path of destruction, and had simply moved left when he should have moved right. Perhaps, as unlikely as it seemed, he was willing to sacrifice himself to save his master. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. He got in the way. There was an explosion of energy that filled the night, and an echoing boom that shook birds from the trees for a mile around. On the few square feet where Norbuth and his horse had stood was nothing but black glass. They had been reduced to less than vapor. Jaina and Lord Strail were thrown back. Their horse, when it recovered its senses, galloped away as fast as it could. In the lingering, glowing aura of the spell's detonation, Lord Strail looked straight into the woods and into the wide eyes of the battle mage. "Damn," said Lord Errol, and began to run. The ambassador jumped to his feet and pursued. "That was an expensive use of magicka, even for you," said Lord Strail as he ran. "Don't you know well enough not to use ranged spells unless you are certain your target won't be blocked?" "I never thought that idiot—" Lord Errol was struck from behind and knocked to the wet forest floor before he had a chance to finish his lamentation. "It doesn't matter what you thought," said Lord Strail calmly, flipping the battle mage around and pinning his arms to the ground with his knees. "I'm not a battle mage, but I knew enough not to use my entire reserve on your little ambush. Perhaps it's a matter of philosophy. As a government agent, I feel inclined toward conservatism." "What are you going to do?" whimpered Lord Errol. "Norbuth was a good man, one of the best, and so I'm going to hurt you quite a lot." The ambassador made a slight movement and his hands began to glow brightly. "That's a certainty. How much more I'm going to hurt you after that depends on what you tell me. I want to hear about the former Duke of Oloin." "What do you want to know?" Lord Errol screamed. "Let's start with everything," replied Lord Strail with perfect patience. And that's all the reading we have in Tiravel Manor. Now we'll head to the Hlalu Council Manor, and we will start upstairs.
Is there something I can do for you?
No, I'm just going to read your books over here. Thank you very much. Okay, let's see. What do we have? The Anticipations and a book we have not read. The Consolations of Prayer. Through the bounty of blessed Almsivi, triune grace, and all the hosts of saints, the faithful who pray at the temple's shrines may be granted blessings through the miraculous sacraments of prayer and devotion. The three-sided shrines betoken the three-faced benison of Almsivi, and may be found in temples, or at sites of pilgrimage, or at pilgrim waysides, or in the tomb of the sanctified. What benefits may be gained shall be listed herein for the edification of the worshipper and pilgrim. All shrines grant cures of common diseases, of blight diseases, and of afflictions of poison. Those shrines bearing the images of Vivec, Almalexia, and Sothasil also may grant the blessing of Almsivi Restoration, which restores damaged attributes, and the three blessings of Almsivi: Vivec's Mastery, for good fortune, Soul of Sothasil, for magical power, and Lady's Grace, for endurance of hardships. Those shrines bearing the images of the saints may also grant the particular blessings of the saints, which are listed for you here. Saint Erlor grants Erlor's Intervention, for fortifying character. Saint Delin grants Shield of Saint Delin, for resistance to blight diseases. Saint Felms grants Felm's Glory, for greater skill in restoring magics. Saint Lothis grants Rock of Lothis, for fortifying the will. Saint Maris grants Maris's Warding, for resistance to Corpus disease. Saint Nerevar grants Spirit of Nerevar, for fortifying the body's vigor. Saint Olms grants Olms Benediction, for resistance to common disease. Saint Rilms grants Rilm's Grace, for endurance of hardships. Saint Roris grants Roris's Bloom, for fortifying the body's health. Saint Saren grants Saren's Shield, for resistance to poisons. Saint Veloth grants Veloth's Indwelling, for magical power, and also grants the blessing of Almsivi Restoration, which restores damaged attributes. The faithful are granted these blessings when they pray at the shrines and make a modest donation. The blessed of the initiate rank and higher of the temple have already made their devotions in service and piety, and need only pray at the shrines to receive their benefits. And Almsivi is generous, so even the unbeliever may receive a blessing if he prays, if he proves his respect with a generous donation. Okay, what else? The Cantatas of Vivec, we've read that.
There is someone watching me, I can tell.
It's not me, I'm just looking at the books. Frontier Conquest. We have not read this one. Varieties of Faith in the Empire by Brother Mikhail Karkukser of the Imperial College. This is my best attempt at a listing of the pantheons and associated divine spirits of Tamriel's dominant cultures. This list is by no means complete. The Imperial city of Cyrodiil alone boasts a vast host of saints and holy spirits. It only includes the most important spirits revered by native members of the culture. Other Atata, especially Daedra, are often familiar known to many cultures, though specific names are included here only when they possess a particular cultural significance. The omission of any reference to the worships of the Argonians of Black Marsh is a result of my complete inadequacy in reconciling the obscure and contradictory accounts available to me on that subject. The 8 Pantheons: Cyrodiil, Akatosh, Dibella, Arche, Zenithar, Mara, Stendar, Kinnereth, Julianos, Shazar, Tiber Septim, Morihaus, Riemann. Skyrim: Alduin, Dibella, Orce, Tsun, Mara, Stun, Kine, Junal, Shor, Izmir, Hermamora, Malak. Altmer: Ariel, Trinimac, Magnus, Cirabane, Ifri, Xarxes, Mara, Stendar, Lorcan, Finaster. Bosmer: Ariel, Ifri, Arche, Zien, Xarxes, Bandar, Mara, Stendar, Lorcan, Hermamora, Joan, Jode. Dunmer: Almalexia, Vivec, Sothosil, Boethia, Mephala, Azura, Lorcan, Nerevar, Molag Bal, Malakath, Sheogorath, Mehrunes Dagon. Yokuda: Sadakal, Ruptka, Tuaka, Zet, Morwa, Tava, Maluk, Diagna, Sep, Hunding, Leki, Onzi. Bretni: Akatosh, Magnus, Ifri, Dibella, Arche, Zenithar, Mara, Stendar, Kinnereth, Julianos, Sheor, Finaster. Elsewhere: Alkosh, Kinarthi, Riddlethar, Jakajay, Mara, Srendar, Lorkaj, Rajin, Bandar, Azura, Shegorath. Notes on the divine spirits of the pantheons. Akatosh, dragon god of time. Akatosh is the chief deity of the 9 divines, the major religious cult of Cyrodiil and its provinces, and one of 2 deities found in every Tamrielic religion. The other is Lorcan. He is generally considered to be the first of the gods to form in the beginning place. After his establishment, other spirits found the process of being easier, and the various pantheons of the world emerged. He is the ultimate god of the Cyrodiilic Empire, where he embodies the qualities of endurance, invincibility, and everlasting legitimacy. Alduin, World Eater. Alduin is the Nordic variation of Akatosh, and only superficially resembles his counterpart in the 9 divines. For example, Alduin Sobriquet, the World Eater, comes from myths that depict him as the horrible, ravaging firestorm that destroyed the last world to begin this one. Nords, therefore, see the god of time as both creator and harbinger of the apocalypse. He is not the chief of the Nordic pantheon. In fact, that pantheon has no chief. See Shore below. But its wellspring, albeit a grim and frightening one. Alkosh, dragon king of cats. Pre-Radata dynasty and Aquinnine deity. A variation on the Altmeri Ariel, and thus an Akatosh as culture hero for the earliest Khajiit. His worship was co-opted during the establishment of the Riddlethar, and he still enjoys immense popularity in Elswere's wasteland regions. He is depicted as a fearsome dragon, a creature the Khajiit say is just a real big cat. He repelled an early Altmeri pogrom of Pelennor Whitestrake during mythic times. Almalexia, Mother Morrowind. Most traces of Akatosh disappeared from ancient Chimer legends during their so-called exodus, primarily due to that god's association and esteem with the Altmeri. However, most aspects of Akatosh which seem so important to the mortal races, namely immortality, historicity, and genealogy, have conveniently resurfaced in Almalexia, the most popular of Morrowind's divine tribunal. Arche, god of the cycle of life and death. member of the Nine Divines pantheon and popular elsewhere as well. Arkay is often more important in those cultures where his father, Akatosh, is either less related to time or where his time aspects are difficult to comprehend by the layman. He is the god of burials and funeral rites, and is sometimes associated with the seasons. His priests are staunch opponents of necromancy and all forms of the undead. It is said that Arkay did not exist before the world was created by the gods under Lorkhan's supervision, urging, trickery. Therefore, he is sometimes called the Mortal's God. Ariel, King of the Aldmer. The elven Akatosh is Ariel. Ariel is the soul of Anuiel, who in turn is the soul of Anu the Everything. He is the chief of most Aldmeri pantheons. Most Altmeri and Bosmeri claim direct descent from Ariel. In his only known moment of weakness, he agreed to take his part in the creation of the mortal plane, that act which forever sundered the elves from the spirit worlds of eternity. To make up for it, Ariel led the original Aldmer against the armies of Lorkhan in mythic times, vanquishing that tyrant and establishing the first kingdoms of the Altmer, Altmora and Old Elnefey. He then ascended to heaven in full observance of his followers so that they might learn the steps needed to escape the mortal plane. Azura, goddess of dusk and dawn. Azura was the god ancestor that taught the Chimer the mysteries needed to be different than the Altmer. Some of her more conventional teachings are sometimes attributed to Boethia. In the stories, Azura is often more a communal cosmic force for the race as a whole than an ancestor or a god. Also known as the anticipation of Sotha-Sil. In Elsewhere, Azura is nearly a wholly separate entity, yet she is still tied into the origins of Khajiit out of Altmeri stock. Bandar, the bandit god. In most regions, Bandar is a marginal deity, a trickster spirit of thieves and beggars. In Elsewhere, he is more important and is regarded as the pariah. In this aspect, Bandar becomes the cleverness or desperate genius of the long-suffering Khajiit, whose last-minute plans always upset the machinations of their elven or human enemies. Boethia, Prince of Plots. Heralded by the prophet Veloth, Boethia is the original god ancestor of the Dark Elves. Through his illuminations, the eventual Chimer, or Changed Folk, renounced all ties to the Aldmer and founded a new nation based on Daedric principles. All manner of Dark Elven cultural advances are attributed to Boethia, from philosophy to magic to responsible architecture. Ancient Velothi allegories are uniformly heroic successes of Boethia over enemies of every type, foundation stories of Chimeri struggle. Also known as the anticipation of Almalexia. Diagna, Orichalk god of the Sideways Blade. Hoary thuggish cult of the Red Guards. Originated in Yokuda during the 27 Snakefolk slaughter. Diagna was an avatar of the Hunding, the Okudan god of Make Way, see below, that achieved permanence. He was instrumental to the defeat of the left-handed elves, as he brought Orichalk weapons to the Okudan people to win the fight. In Tamriel, he led a very tight-knit group of followers against the orcs of Orsinium during the height of their ancient power, but then faded into obscurity. He is now little more than a local power spirit of the Dragontail Mountains. Tibella, goddess of beauty. Popular god of the Nine Divines. In Cyrodiil, she has nearly a dozen different cults, some devoted to women, some to artists and aesthetics, and others to erotic instruction. Hermamora, the Woodland Man. Ancient Atmoran demon who, at one time, nearly seduced the Nords into becoming Aldmer. Most Isgramor myths are about escaping the wiles of old Hermamora. Also called the Demon of Knowledge, he is vaguely related to the cult origins of the Morag Tong, Forester's Guild, if only by association with his brother's sister, Mephala. Hunding, the Make-Way god, Yokudan spirit of perseverance over infidels. The Hunding has historically materialized whenever the Red Guards need to make way for their people. In Tamrielic history, this has only happened 3 times, twice in the First Era during the Ragada invasion, and once during the Tiber War. In this last incarnation, the Hunding was said to have been either a sword or a crown, or both. Junal, Rune God, the Nordic god of hermetic orders. After falling out of favor with the rest of that pantheon, he became Julianos of the Nine Divines. He is absent in modern Skyrim mythology. Jode, Big Moon God, Aldmeri god of the Big Moon, also called Masser or Mara's Tear. In Khajiit religion, Jode is only one aspect of the lunar lattice, or Ja-Khaje. Joan, Little Moon God, Aldmeri god of the Little Moon, also called Secunda or Stendar's Sorrow. In Khajiit religion, Joan is only one aspect of the lunar lattice, or Ja-Khaje. Julianos, god of wisdom and logic. Often associated with Junal, the Nordic father of language and mathematics, Julianos is the Cyrillic god of literature, law, history, and contradiction. Monastic orders founded by Tiber Septim and dedicated to Julianos are the keepers of the Elder Scrolls. Kine, kiss at the end, Nordic goddess of the storm, widow of shore and favored god of warriors. She is often called the mother of men. Her daughters taught the first Nords the use of the Thu'um, or storm voice. Kinnereth, goddess of air. Kinnereth is a member of the Nine Divines, the strongest of the sky spirits. In some legends, she is the first to agree to Lorkhan's plan to invent the mortal plane, and provides the space for its creation in the void. She is also associated with rain, a phenomenon said not to occur before the removal of Lorkhan's divine spark. Leki, saint of the spirit sword. Goddess daughter of Tall Papa, Leki is the goddess of aberrant swordsmanship. The Nato Tambu of Yokuda warred to a standstill during the Mythic era to decide who would lead the charge against the left-handed elves. Their swordmasters, though, were so skilled in the best-known cuts as to be matched evenly. Leki introduced the ephemeral feint. Afterwards, a victor emerged, and the war with the Aldmer began. Lorkhan, the missing god. This creator, trickster, tester deity is in every Tamrielic mythic tradition. His most popular name is the Aldmeri Lorkhan, or Doom Drum. He convinced or contrived the original spirits to bring about the creation of the mortal plane, upsetting the status quo, much like his father Padme had introduced instability into the universe in the beginning place. After the world is materialized, Lorkhan is separated from his divine center, sometimes involuntarily, and wanders the creation of the Atata. He and his metaphysical placement in the scheme of things is interpreted a variety of ways. In Morrowind, for example, he is a being related to the Psijic Endeavor, a process by which mortals are charged with transcending the gods that created them. To the High Elves, he is the most unholy of all higher powers, as he forever broke their connection to the spirit plane. In the legends, he is almost always an enemy of the Aldmer, and, therefore, a hero of early mankind. Lorkhaj, Moon Beast. Pre-Radata Dynasty Anaquining deity, easily identified with the missing god, Lorkhan. Magnus, Magus. The god of sorcery, Magnus withdrew from the creation of the world at the last second, though it cost him dearly. What is left of him on the world is felt and controlled by mortals as magic. One story says that, while the idea was thought up by Lorkhan, it was Magnus who created the schematics and diagrams needed to construct the mortal plane. He is sometimes represented by an astrolabe, a telescope, or, more commonly, a staff. Cyrodiilic legends say he can inhabit the bodies of powerful magicians and lend them his power. Associated with Zurin Arctus, the Underking. Malakath, god of curses. Malakath is the reanimated dung that was Trinamac. A somewhat weak but vengeful Daedra, the Dark Elves say he is also Malak, the god king of the orcs. He always tests the Dunmer for physical weakness. Maluk, Horde King, an enemy god of the Ra-Gada. Led the goblins against the Red Guards during the First Era. Fled east when the army of the Hunding overtook his goblin hordes. Moloch, Malakath. An orcish god, Moloch troubled the heirs of King Harald for a long time. Fled east after his defeat at the Battle of Dragon Wall, circa First Era 660. His rage was said to fill the sky with his sulfurous hatred, later called the Year of Winter in Summer. Mara, goddess of love. Nearly universal goddess. Origins started in mythic times as a fertility goddess. In Skyrim, Mara is a handmaiden of Kine. In the Empire, she is mother goddess. She is sometimes associated with Nyr of the Anoad, the female principle of the cosmos that gave birth to creation. Depending on the religion, she is either married to Akatosh or Lorkhan, or the concubine of both. Mehrunes Dagon, god of destruction. Popular Daedric power. He is associated with natural dangers like fire, earthquakes, and floods. In some cultures, though, Dagon is merely a god of bloodshed and betrayal. He is an especially important deity in Morrowind, where he represents its near-inhospitable terrain. Mephala, Androgyne. Mephala is the web spinner, or the spinner god. In Morrowind, she was the ancestor that taught the Chimer the skills they would need to evade their enemies or to kill them with secret murder. Enemies were numerous in those days, since the Chimer were a small faction. She, along with Boethia, organized the clan systems that eventually became the basis for the Great Houses. She founded the Morag Tong, also called the Anticipation of Vivec. Molag Bal, god of schemes, king of rape. Daedric power of much importance in Morrowind. There, he is always the archenemy of Boethia, the prince of plots. He is the main source of the obstacles to the Dunmer and preceding Chimer people. In the legends, Molag Bal always tries to upset the bloodlines of houses or otherwise ruin Dunmeri purity. A race of super monsters said to live in Molag Amur are the result of his seduction of Vivec during the previous era. Morihaus, first breath of man. Ancient cultural hero god of the Syro-Nordics. Legend portrays him as the taker of the Citadel, an act of mythic times that established human control over the Valley Heartland. He is often associated with the Nordic powers of Thu'um, and therefore with Kinnereth. Morwa, Teat god. Yokudan fertility goddess. Fundamental deity in the Yokudan pantheon and the favorite of Tall Papa's wives. Still worshipped in various areas of Hammerfell, including Strosum Kai. Morwa is always portrayed as four-armed so that she can grab more husbands. Nerevar, God-Killer. The Chimera King of Resdain, the Golden Age of Old Veloth. Slain during the Battle of Red Mountain, Nerevar was the herald of the Triune Way and is the foremost of the saints of Dunmeri faith. He is said to have killed Dumak, the last dwarven king, and feasted on his heart. Onzi, Boneshaver. Notable warrior god of the Yokudan Ragada, Onzi taught mankind how to pull their knives into swords. Orke, Old Knocker. A lone god of the Nords, who seemed to have taken up his worship during Aldmeri rule of Atmora. Nords believe they once lived as long as elves until Orke appeared. Through heathen trickery, he fooled them into a bargain that bound them to the Count of Winters. At one time, legends say, Nords only had a lifespan of 6 years due to Orke's foul magic. Shor showed up, though, and, through unknown means, removed the curse, throwing most of it onto the nearby orcs. Finaster, hero god of the Somerset Isles, who taught the Altmer how to naturally live another 100 years by using a shorter walking stride. Rajin, footpad, thief god of the Khajiit, who grew up in the Black Kyrgyz section of Senchal. The most famous burglar in Elsewhere's history, Rajin is said to have stolen a tattoo from the neck of Empress Kintyra as she slept. Riemann, the Cyrodiil. Culture god hero of the Second Empire, Riemann was the greatest hero of the Akaviri Trouble. Indeed, he convinced the invaders to help him build his own empire and conquered all of Tamriel except for Morrowind. He instituted the rites of becoming emperor, which included the ritual Geas to the Amulet of Kings, a soul gem of immense power. His dynasty was ended by the Dunmeri Morag Tong at the end of the First Era, also called the Worldly God. Riddlethar, Two Moons Dance. The cosmic order deity of the Khajiit, the Riddlethar was revealed to Elsewhere by the prophet Ridthar-Riddata, the Main. The Riddlethar is more a set of guidelines by which to live than a single entity, but some of his avatars like to appear as humble messengers of the gods, also known as the Sugar God. Ruptka, Tall Papa, chief deity of the Yokudan pantheon. Ruptka, more commonly Tall Papa, was the first god to figure out how to survive the hunger of Satakal. Following his lead, the other gods learned the walkabout, or a process by which they can persist beyond one lifetime. Tall Papa set the stars in the sky to show lesser spirits how to do this too. When there were too many spirits to keep track of, though, Ruptka created a helper out of the dead skin of past worlds. This helper is Sep, see below, who later creates the world of mortals. Satakal, the World Skin, Yokudan god of everything, a fusion of the concepts of Anu and Padme. Basically, Satakal is much like the Nordic Alduin, who destroys one world to begin the next. In Yokudan mythology, Satakal had done and still does this many times over, a cycle which prompted the birth of spirits that could survive the transition. These spirits ultimately become the Yokudan pantheon. Popular god of the Alikur nomads. Sheogorath, the Mad God. The fearful obeisance of Sheogorath is widespread and is found in most Tamrielic quarters. Contemporary sources indicate that his roots are in Aldmeri creation stories. Therein, he is born when Lorkhan's divine spark is removed. One crucial myth calls him the Sithis-shaped hole of the world. Sheor, Bad Man. In Brittany, the Bad Man is the source of all strife. He seems to have started as the god of crop failure, but most modern theologians agree that he is a demonized version of the Nordic Shor, born during the Dark Years after the fall of Sarthal. Sep, the snake, Yokuden version of Lorcan. Sep is born when Tall Papa creates someone to help him regulate the spirit trade. Sep, though, is driven crazy by the hunger of Sadakal, and he convinces some of the gods to help him make an easier alternative to the walkabout. This, of course, is the world as we know it, and the spirits who followed Sep became trapped here to live out their lives as mortals. Sep is punished by Tall Papa for his transgressions, but his hunger lives on as a void in the stars, a non-space that tries to upset mortal entry into the far shores. Shazar, god of man. Cyrodiilic version of Lorcan, whose importance suffers when Akatosh comes to the fore of Imperial, really Alessian, religion. Shazar was the spirit behind all human undertaking, especially against Aldmeri aggression. He is sometimes associated with the founding of the first Cyrodiilic battle mages. In the present age of racial tolerance, Shazar is all but forgotten. Shor, god of the underworld. Nordic version of Lorcan, who takes sides with men after the creation of the world. Foreign gods, i.e. elven ones, conspire against him and bring about his defeat, dooming him to the underworld. Atmoran myths depict him as a bloodthirsty warrior king who leads the Nords to victory over their Aldmeri oppressors time and again. Before his doom, Shor was the chief of the gods, sometimes also called children's god, see Orke above. Sothasil, mystery of Morrowind. God of the Dunmer, Sothasil is the least known of the Divine Tribunal. He is said to be reshaping the world from his hidden clockwork city. Stendarr, god of mercy. God of the Nine Divines, Stendarr has evolved from his Nordic origins into a deity of compassion or, sometimes, righteous rule. He is said to have accompanied Tiber Septim in his later years. In early Altmeri legends, Stendarr is the apologist of men. Stun, god of ransom. Nordic precursor to Stendarr, brother of Tsun. Shieldthane of Shor, Stun was a warrior god that fought against the Aldmeri pantheon. He showed men how to take, and the benefits of taking, prisoners of war. Ciribane, warlock's god. An Aldmeri god ancestor of magic, Ciribane aided Bendu Olo in the fall of the Slode. Through judicious use of his magical ring, Ciribane saved many from the scourge of the Thracian plague. He is also called the Apprentice's god, for he is a favorite of the younger members of the Mages Guild. Tava, bird god, Yokuden spirit of the air. Tava is most famous for leading the Yokudens to the Isle of Herne after the destruction of their homeland. She has since become assimilated into the mythology of Kinnereth. She is still very popular in Hammerfell among sailors, and her shrines can be found in most port cities. Tiber Septim, Talos, the Dragonborn. Heir to the seat of Sundered Kings, Tiber Septim is the most important hero god of mankind. He conquered all of Tamriel and ushered in the Third Era, and the Third Empire. Also called Izmir, Dragon of the North. Trinimac, strong god of the early Aldmer, in some places more popular than Ariel. He was a warrior spirit of the original elven tribes that led armies against the men. Boethia is said to have assumed his shape. In some stories, he even eats Trinimac so that he could convince a throng of Aldmer to listen to him, which led to their eventual Chimeric conversion. He vanishes from the mythic stage after this, to return as the dread Malakath. Altmeri propaganda portrays this as the dangers of Dunmeri influence. Tsun, extinct Nordic god of trials against adversity. Died defending Shor from foreign gods. Tuwaka, tricky god. Yokuden god of souls. Tuwaka, before the creation of the world, was the god of nobody really cares. When Tall Papa undertook the creation of the Walkabout, Tuwaka found a purpose. He became the caretaker of the far shores and continues to help Redguards find their way into the afterlife. His cult is sometimes associated with Arche in the more cosmopolitan regions of Hammerfell. Vivec, master of Morrowind. Warrior poet god of the Dunmer. Vivec is the invisible keeper of the Holy Land, ever vigilant against the dark gods of the volcano. She has saved the Dunmeri people from certain death on numerous occasions, most notably when she taught them how to breathe water for a day so that she could flood Morrowind and kill the Akaviri invaders, circa 2nd Era 572. Xarxes. Xarxes is the god of ancestry and secret knowledge. He began as a scribe to Ariel and has kept track of all Aldmeri accomplishments, large and small, since the beginning of time. He created his wife Ogma from his favorite moments in history. Ifri, god of the forest, most important deity of the Bosmeri pantheon. While Ariel Time Dragon might be the king of the gods, the Bosmer revere Ifri as the spirit of the now. According to the Wood Elves, after the creation of the mortal plane, everything was in chaos. The first mortals were turning into plants and animals and back again. Then Ifri transformed himself into the first of the Elnifei, or Earthbones. After these laws of nature were established, mortals had a semblance of safety in the New World because they could finally understand it. Ifri is sometimes called the Storyteller for the lessons he taught the first Bosmer. Some Bosmer still possess the knowledge of the Chaos Times, which they can use to great effect, the Wild Hunt. Ysmir, Dragon of the North. The Nordic aspect of Talos. He withstood the power of the Greybeard's voices long enough to hear their prophecy. Later, many Nords could not look on him without seeing a dragon. Zien, God of Toil. Bosmeri god of payment in kind. Studies indicate origins in both Argonian and Akaviri mythologies, perhaps introduced into Valenwood by Kothringi sailors. Ostensibly an agriculture deity, Zien sometimes proves to be an entity of a much higher cosmic order. His worship died out shortly after the Knahaten flew. Zet, God of Farms. Yokudan god of agriculture. Renounced his father after the world was created, which is why Talpapa makes it so hard to grow food. Zenithar, god of work and commerce, trader god. Member of the Nine Divines, Zenithar is understandably associated with Zien. In the Empire, however, he is a far more cultivated god of merchants and middle nobility. His worshippers say, despite his mysterious origins, Zenithar is the god that will always win. That is a lot of deities. Aedra and Daedra, the annotated Anoad, Ancestors and the Dunmer. This is new. The True Noble's Code by Sergio Athens Serethi. The honorable warriors of the Great House Redoran are the hereditary defenders of Morrowind. To be a noble of House Redoran is more than being a great warrior. One must follow the triune virtues of duty, gravity, and piety. A Redoran's duty is first to the Tribunal Temple, second to the Great House Redoran, and third to one's family and clan. In the Battle of Red Mountain, warriors of House Redoran died bravely for their duty to the Tribunal. By defending House Redoran from the schemes of Telvanni wizards and the lies of untrustworthy Hlalu, the true noble shows duty to House Redoran. Following the temple's guidelines of mercy and generosity showed duty to one's family and clan. A Redoran noble must know the virtue of gravity. It is not the Redoran way to laugh at serious matters, for it shows disrespect. It is not the Redoran way to spread rumors, for they fester and breed dissension. A Redoran must show piety to the Aedra and Daedra, our creators and ancestors. For without the divine, we would not have the chance to serve. And without divine law, we would not know right from wrong. And without giving thanks for these things, we would forget our place and our purpose. Great House Redoran praises all the skills of war, not because we believe war is good or honorable in its own right, but because this knowledge is necessary to perform one's duty. House Redoran's warriors fight with a long blade and a shield, or with a spear. A noble of House Redoran must also learn to use a bow, and must be athletic enough for the long marches to battle. A Redoran wears heavy or medium armor depending on rank and strategy. A noble of House Redoran is expected to know how to repair and maintain his own armor. Those who are born to House Redoran have been taught their skill and virtues by kin and clan. Those who seek to enter House Redoran as retainers must satisfy an examiner in the Redoran Council Hall that their skills are suitable for service to House Redoran. Whether born to the blood of House Redoran or adopted into service of House Redoran by oath, those who seek to advance in the ranks of House Redoran must demonstrate their virtues by service and obedience. And only when one has mastered all the skills and virtues can one truly call himself a noble of the Great House Redoran. Right, so Klingons, basically. Okay. Well, we've got another book downstairs that we want to read.
Go ahead, Outlander. What do you need?
I need to read this book. Guylaine's Architecture of the Second Empire. This is Guylaine Marley's outdated but entertainingly written and well-illustrated reference on late Dwemer architecture. Excerpt is from the chapter describing the Second Empire style of approaches and defenses, and mentioning the common formal convention of the four tests. The book also mentions that the Telvanni have adopted this four tests convention as an aesthetic element in their defenses and approaches to their towers. The test of pattern requires the observer to examine and analyze for patterns before he acts, with the understanding that many patterns are subtle or hidden. The test of disorder requires the observer to proceed systematically when no pattern is perceived. When the observer recognizes that many things must be done, and in no specific order, the procedure is to perceive and order all the things to be done, and, upon doing a thing, to recall how and when that thing has been done. For example, the observer must remember the initial position of a thing, and also the new position of that thing. The test of evasion requires the observer to examine the obstacle and compare his resources and abilities. If the obstacle is too difficult, seek for a path around the difficulty. The test of confrontation requires the observer to examine the obstacle and compare his resources and abilities. If the obstacle is too difficult, look for a path around the difficulty. But if no path around can be found, confront the obstacle directly. And we are done in here. Next stop is Nerano Manor.
Go ahead, Outlander. What do you need?
I need to go over here. And head upstairs. Let's see here. Books. We've read the Book of Dawn and Dusk, Ancestors in the Dunmer. We have not read this. The Eastern Provinces, Impartially Considered. And even if we overlook the dubious moral and legal justifications for hundreds of years of occupation of these two provinces, what economic or military benefits can we derive from Morrowind and Black Marsh? Indeed, a few beneficiaries of imperial monopolies in the provinces do profit from exploitation of their wealth and resources, but does the empire as a whole benefit? Hardly. The vast machineries of the imperial bureaucracies cost far more to maintain than can be recovered in duties and taxes, and the cost of establishing and maintaining the garrisons of the Imperial Legion and the far-flung wilderness posts of these provinces would be cost-effective only if there were evidence of a military threat from the east, but no such evidence exists. No army of Morrowind or Black Marsh has ever threatened the security of any other imperial province, let alone the security of Cyrodiil itself. In fact, a greater threat to imperial security lies in the idle legions that the taxpayer spends thousands of drakes to support. The generals of these legions, facing no enemies or opposition within the borders of their provinces, may look with ambition to the west. With their loyal veteran troops and coffers fattened by friendly monopolists, they become unpredictable political factors in the uncertainties surrounding the imperial succession. If the occupation of Morrowind and Black Marsh were motivated by idealistic aspirations, perhaps there might lie some justification for bearing the burden of the Empire. But consider the shame of the Empire's mute acceptance to the unspeakable practice of slavery in Morrowind. Instead of using our Imperial legions to free the wretched Khajiit and Argonian slaves from their Dark Elf masters, we pay our troopers to protect the indefensible institution of slavery. Within the ebony mines of Morrowind, bloated monopolists under imperial charters exploit slave labor to harvest the outrageous profits assured by rampant graft and corruption. Consider the colossal arrogance of our proposition to bring peace and enlightenment to the East, when in fact, we have only brought our armies into lands who have never threatened us, and when we have only exploited the most shameful and evil practices we have found in Morrowind and Black Marsh, simply to enrich the friends and flatterers of the imperial family. Impartially considered, our occupation of the eastern provinces is morally corrupt, militarily indefensible, and economically ruinous. The only conclusion is that we should disband the Eastern Legions, withdraw the imperial bureaucracies and monopolists from the East, and give these ancient lands and peoples their freedom. Only by doing so may we hope to preserve the fragile ideals and fortunes of Western culture. Cool story, bro. I think we've read that. Yeah, we've read everything that's in here, so let's... I'm trying to find the way out. I think the door's over here. Okay. Round and round we go. Well, next stop is going to be the Morag Tong Guild Hall. Nice to see you too. The Black Glove. Swift and agile are the Morag Tong. Silent and unseen they move. Illusions they supply to misdirect their prey. Close and sure they strike with short blade, or distant and secure they strike from afar with accurate missile fire. Light armor protects them from harm, and the acrobatic discipline finds for them the unseen and unlooked-for path. Have you these virtues? Then perhaps your oath and service may please the Morag Tong. Do you have your friends and your finery, but no place to go? Do you laugh and cry, but no longer feel? Do you wear these masks? Then perhaps your oath and service may please the Black Glove. The blood of the hunter and the blood of the hunted. The joy of the hidden and the joy of the seeker. The blood of the eye and the blood of the gate. The joy of living and the joy of the dead. Are you one with these things? Then perhaps your oath and service may please Mephala. To make your oath and enter our service, the worthy must seek the Grand Master, who by tradition lives in the unseen and unlooked-for corners of Vivec City between the blood of battle and the waters of life. Oh, there's a little hint about where to find Grand Master Ino Hlalu. Okay, next, it's time to head to the temple, so we can read all their temple propaganda. Oh boy. I should have just used Almcivi intervention. What was I thinking? Oh well, this is fine. Little exercise never hurt Fedar. Let's see here. We are heading up. Hi.
Greetings, Outlander. Don't I know you from somewhere?
I hope not. Anyway, I'm gonna read your books. Let's start up here. The Anticipations, Lives of the Saints, the Cantatas of Vivec. We have read all of those. But not this. This is new. The 36 Lessons of Vivec, Sermon 34. Then Vivec left the Ministry of Truth and went back to the space that was not a space. From the provisional house, he looked into the middle world to find the 8th and final and mightiest monster, called Gulga Mor Jill, and more. The wise must look elsewhere for this string of power. Vivec called to his side the Hortator, and this was the first time that Nerevar had ever been to the provisional house. He had the same vision that Vivec had so many years ago, that of the two-headed ruling king. Who is that, he wondered. Vivec said, the Red Jewel of Conquest. Nerevar, perhaps because he was frightened, became vexed at his lord's answer. Why are you always so evasive? Vivec told the Hortator that to be otherwise was to betray his nature. Together, they moved into the middle world, to a village near where Vivec had been found by Aim and Set. The 8th monster was there, but he did not act much like a monster. He sat with his legs in the ocean and with a troubled look on his face. When he saw his mother-father, he asked why he should have to die and return to oblivion. Vivec told the 8th monster that to be otherwise was to betray his nature. Since this did not seem to satisfy the monster, and Vivec still had a touch of Aem's mercy, he said, the fire is mine. Let it consume thee, and make a secret door, at the altar of Padme, in the house of Boeotia, where we become safe and looked after. The monster accepted Muatra with a peaceful look, and his bones became the foundation for the city of the dead, Anon Narcissus. Nerevar put away his axe, which he had at the ready, and frowned. Why, he said, did you ask me to come if you knew the 8th monster would give in so easily? Vivec looked at the Hortator for a long time. Nerevar understood. Do not betray your nature. Answer as you will. Vivec said, I brought you here because I knew the mightiest of my issue would succumb to Muatra without argument, if only I gave him consolation first. Nerevar looked at Vivec for a long time. Vivec understood. Say the words, Hortator. Nerevar said, Now I am the mightiest of your children. Let this sermon be consolation to those who read it that are destined to die. The ending of the words is Almcivi. Of course. This is new as well. The Homilies of Blessed Almalexia. Sothasil and the Scribes. Young Sothasil, while playing in the egg mines, saw a number of scribs in a deep shaft, and he began to cast stones upon them, snickering as they skittered and scattered, until one of the scribs, lifting its head up in agony, cried out to Sothasil, "Please, please have mercy, little boy, for what is sport to you is suffering and death to us." And so Sothasil discovered that the idle amusements of one may be the solemn tortures of another. Lord Vivec and the Contentious Beasts. A Shulk and a Kagudi were strutting back and forth in a foyada, casting aspersions of one another's looks. "You are the ugliest creature alive," the Shulk told the Kagudi. "No, you are the ugliest creature alive," the Kagudi told the Shulk, for each thought himself most handsome, and the other most ugly. Then Lord Vivec chanced by, and settled their dispute. "No, you are both the ugliest creatures alive, and I will not have my pleasant sojourn spoiled by your unseemly squabbling." So he dealt them both mighty blows, shattering their skulls, and silencing their argument, and went merrily upon his way. And thus Lord Vivec proved that ugliness is as much in one's manner as in one's appearance. The Boiled Kagudi. It is said that if a Kagudi steps into a boiling pool, he will leap out immediately to avoid harm. But if the Kagudi is standing in a pool, and a wizard slowly raises the temperature measure by measure to boiling, the Kagudi will calmly stand in place until he is boiled. Thus we see that we must be alert not only to the obvious danger, but also to the subtle degrees by which change may result in danger. The Dubious Healer. Once upon a time, a Telvanni issued forth from his tower and proclaimed to all the world that he was a mighty and learned healer, master of all alchemy and potions, and able to cure all diseases. Lord Vivec looked upon this wizard and listened to his boasting, then asked him, "How can you pretend to prescribe for others the cure to all diseases when you are unable to cure yourself of your own manifest arrogance and foolishness?" The Gwar and the Mudcrabs. The Gwar were so tormented by the other creatures they did not know where to go. As soon as they saw a single beast approach them, off they dashed in terror. One day they saw a pack of Nixhounds ranging about, and in a desperate panic all the Gwar scuttled off towards the sea, determined to drown themselves rather than live in such a continual state of fear. But just as they got near the shoreline, a colony of mudcrabs, frightened in their turn by the approach of the Gwar, scuttled off and threw themselves into the water. "Truly," said one of the Gwar, "things are not so bad as they seem, for there is always someone worse off than you." The Wounded Netch. A wounded Netch lay himself down in a quiet corner of its feeding ground. His healthy companions came in great numbers to inquire after his health, yet each one helped himself to a share of the fodder which had been placed there for his use, so that the poor Netch died, not from his wounds, but from the greed and carelessness of his erstwhile friends. And so it is clear that thoughtless companions may bring more harm than help. Okay, and we just read that. Elsewhere, we've read The Pilgrim's Path. We have not read this. The 36 Lessons of Vivec, Sermon 14. Vivec lay with Molag Bal for 80 days and 8, though headless. In that time, the prince placed the warrior poet's feet back and filled them with the blood of Daedra. In this way, Vivec's giant form remained forever harmless to good earth. The pomegranate banquet brought many spirits back from the dead, so that the sons and daughters of the union had much to eat besides fruit. The Duke of Scamps came while the banquet was still underway, and Molag Bal looked on the 7 penance with anger. The King of Rape had become necessary, and therefore troubled for the rest of time. His legions and Cautas fell into open war, but the children of Molag Bal and Vivec were too elaborate in power and form. The Duke of Scamps therefore became a lesser thing, as did all his own children. Molag Bal said to them, "You are the sons of liars, dogs, and wolf-headed women. They have been useless to summon ever since." The Holy One returned at last, Vec, golden with wisdom. His head found its body had been tenderly used. He mentioned this to Molag Bal, who told him that he should thank the barons of Move like this, "For I have yet to learn how to refine my rapture. My love is accidentally shaped like a spear." So Vivec, who had a grain of Aem's mercy, set about to teach Molag Bal in the ways of belly magic. They took their spears out and compared them. Vivec bit new words onto the King of Rapes so that it might give more than ruin to the uninitiated. This has since become a forbidden ritual, though people still practice it in secret. Here is why. The Velothi and demons and monsters that were watching all took out their own spears. There was much biting, and the earth became wet. And this was the last laugh of Molag Bal. Watch as the earth shall crack, heavy with so much power that should have been forever unalike. Then that stretch of badlands that had been the site of the marriage fragmented and threw fire, and a race that is no more, but that was terrible at the time to behold, came forth. Born of the biters, that is all they did, and they ran amok across the lands of Veloth and even to the shores of Red Mountain. But Vivec made of his spear a more terrible thing, from a secret he had bitten off from the King of Rape. And so he sent Molag Bal tumbling into the crack of the biters and swore forever that he would not deem the king beautiful ever again. Vivec wept as he slew all those around him with his terrible new spear. He named it Muatra, which is milk-taker, and even the Chimeri mystics knew his fury. Anyone struck by Vivec at this time turned barren and withered into bone shapes. The path of bones became a sentence for the stars to read, and the heavens have never known children since. Vivec hunted down the biters one by one, and all their progeny, and he killed them all by means of the 9 apertures, and the wise still hide theirs from Muatra. The ending of the words is Almcivi. Okay, I think that spear-biting stuff is a really wacky metaphor.
Where is that slave?
Don't ask me that. I'll punch you in the face. Fellowship of the Temple by Archcanon Tholar Saryani. I have been asked to write this guidebook for outsiders who are unfamiliar with the Tribunal Temple and interested in joining. All those who are earnest and who are willing to submit to the wisdom of Blessed Almcivi, Triune Grace, the saints, and the priests are welcome to the Fellowship of the Tribunal Temple. The temple is the religion of Morrowind and Dunmer people, and has been for generation upon generation. With guidance and counsel of Almalexia, Vivec, and Sothasil, the Anticipations, and all the hosts of saints of ancestors, the temple guards and protects the lands and peoples of Morrowind. Those who follow the tribunal must have the personality to lead others and the willpower to resist the world's temptations. When violence is needful, we fight with staves and hammers, armored only in our faith. We study restoration and alchemy to heal the people, and mysticism to learn more of the divine. We must also study conjuration to speak with the spirits of our ancestors and protect against those who traffic with the Four Corners. Those interested in joining the Tribunal Temple should speak to priests at the temples in Aldrune, Balmora, Molag Mar, and Ghostgate, or with priests at the High Fane in the temple compound in Vivec. Articles of Faith. The temple believes that Almalexia, Vivec, and Sothasil were mortal guardians of Morrowind who walked the earth, defeated the Dunmer's greatest enemies, the Nords and the Dwarves, and achieved divine substance through superhuman discipline and virtue and supernatural wisdom and insight. Like loving ancestors, they guard and counsel their followers. Like stern parents, they punish sin and error. Like generous relatives, they share their bounty among the greatest and the least, according to their needs. Duties of the Faithful. Your fourfold duties are to faith, family, masters, and all that is good. Perform holy quests and bring luster to the temple. Never transgress against your brothers or sisters, and never dishonor your house or your ancestors. Serve and protect the poor and weak, and honor your elders and clan. For those who would be wise, these sacred books will be of interest. Saryoni's Sermons. Learn from the teachings of Vivec and from the Archcanon's sermons on the 7 graces. Lives of the Saints. Members of the temple who wish to be virtuous will model their lives on the lives of the saints. The Pilgrim's Path. The path to wisdom and self-knowledge is through pilgrimage. Those who would rise in the ranks of the faithful may retrace the steps of the lords and saints, and gain blessings and learn virtue by suffering and overcoming hardships. The Consolations of Prayer. Learn what bounties and blessing might be gained by prayer at the shrines found in temples, and in places of pilgrimage, and in the tombs of our ancestors. Okay, that's the bookshelf. And now this. The Doors of the Spirit. The ancestors are among us. They are never farther away than the waiting door. The ancestors are not departed. The dead are not under the earth. Their spirits are in the restless wind, in the fire's voice, in the foot-smoothed step. Pay heed to these things, and you will know your absent kin. Pay reverence through gift and prayer. Acquaint the ancestors with your affairs, with your comings and goings, with your blessings and trials. From the waiting door comes your protection. Heed the spirits who are the guardians of your hearth, teachers of wisdom, counselors of fortune, seers of fate. Each bone is a door through the wall of the world. Each bone is the road, with wisdom and power the travelers. Each bone is the ghost fence that guards us from evil. Honor the ancestors upon your hearths, within your halls, in the community of your temples, in the solitude of your tombs. Guard your ancestors from beasts, from thieves, from profane priests and sorcerers. Let no creature steal your spirits, for the plundered hearth is diminished, and the plundered tomb is shamed. Live in one world with your spirits. Honor the spirits within and without you. Do not grieve for the dead. Take shelter in their arms, and pay heed to their words. Sure, I'll get right on that. And that's everything we're going to be reading in the temple here. Now it's time to head to Labor Town. Those are boxes. This is the right way. Very good. From this point forward, the frame rate of the video starts to decrease. And I didn't notice that while I was recording. There was no indication whatsoever. I only saw it when I was editing afterwards. But since this is just a story time, all we're doing is reading a bunch of books, I decided not to re-record everything. Okay, so we're looking for Carlira's house. It's over here somewhere. Nope, that's not it. There it is.
Talk is free. What do you want?
I want to go upstairs and read The Warrior's Charge, an old poem of the Red Guards. The star-sung, far-flung tales, wreathed in the silver of Yokuta fair, of a warrior who, arrayed in hue sails, his charges through the serpent's snare. And the Lord of Runes, so bored so soon, leaves the ship for an evening's dare, perchance to wake the coiled snake, to take its shirt of scales to wear. And the Lady East, who every beast, asleep or a prowl, can rouse a scare, screams as her eye, a light in the sky, a worm no goodly sight can bear. And the mailed steed adjoins the deed, not to be undone from his worthy share, rides the knight towards Scale Bright, leaving the seasoned warrior's care. Then the serpent rose and made stead to close, the targets lay plain and there. But the warrior's blade the snake unmade, and the charges wander no more, they swear. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it, thank you. I'll be here all night. And now we must cross the River Odai.
Is there something you need?
I need to go into Durain Thalas's house.
I can spare a few moments, if you care to talk.
No, thank you, crazy pillow lady. I'm in here to read one of your books. There it is. The 36 Lessons of Vivec, Sermon 20. The first monster was actually 2, having been born twice like his mother-father, Vivec. He was not the mightiest of the 8 to escape Muatra, but his actions were the most worrisome. He was known as Moon Axle, and he harvested the leftover foibles of nature. This he did twice, as was said, and the second harvest always brought ruin or unwritten law. His aspect was faceted like a polyhedron. No perils are mentioned in the finding of Moon Axle, but it was known that he was immune to spears, so Vivec had to use the sword not held against him. Before he took issue with the monster, the warrior poet asked, "How came you to be immune to spears?" To which Moon Axle replied, "Mine is a dual nature and protean. I am in fact made of many straight lines, though none last too long. In this way, I have learned to ignore all true segments." Luckily, the sword not held was curved, and therefore could cut into Moon Axle, and before the sun was up, he was bleeding from many wounds. Vivec did not slay him outright, for to do so would keep the foibles of nature within him, and not back where they belonged. Soon, Vivec had traced geography right again, and Moon Axle was ready to be slain. Vivec rose up in his giant form, to be terrible to look upon. He reached into the west and pulled out a canyon, holding it like a horn. He reached east and ate a handful of nixhounds. Blowing their spirits through the canyon made a terrible wail, not unlike an unsolved woman. He said, "Let this overtake you," and Moonaxle was overtaken by the curvatures of stolen souls. They wrapped about the monster like resin, until finally he could not move, nor could his dual nature. Vivec said, "Now you are solved," and pierced his child with Muatra. Moonaxle had been reduced to something static, and therefore shattered. The lines of Moonaxle were collected by Velothi philosophers and taken into caves. There, and for a year, Vivec taught the philosophers how to turn the lines of his son into the spokes of mystery wheels. This was the birth of the first whirling school. Before, there had been only the surface thought of fire. Vivec looked at his first wheeling students and observed. Alike the egg-layered universe is this morbid possession of three distant coverage, soul-wrecked and alive, like my name is alive. In this cloister you have discovered one walking path, held like a sword, but more coarsened. So edged it is that it has to be whispered to keep the tongue from bleeding, where its signs evacuate their former meanings, like empires that tarry too long. The sword is estrangement from statesmanship. Look on the estimable lines of my son, now crafted star-wise, his every limb equidistant from the center. Is he solved because I will it so? There cannot be a second stage. Think on the theory that my existence promulgates the five elements, and alike the egg-layered universe, I am cause for great destiny. Here is a thought that can break the wagon's axle. Here is another that can soar. The ending of the words is Almcivi. Ah, religion. And we've read these other two books. Man, that stuff is trippy. Why do you read that? Well, anyway. Next stop is the South Wall Corner Club.
Do you want something from me?
No.
Speak freely.
You're a talking cat. Honor Among Thieves by Arnie the Scrib. Many admirers ask, "Arnie, how can I become a flash and prosperous fellow like you?" And I tell them, you want to join the guild, make friends, be a part of something. But who can join, they ask. We're just like any other trade guild. We've got requirements, and if you want to advance in the ranks, we've got standards. You want to be fast and agile. You want to move undetected. You want to know about security, locks, traps, and how to get around them. You want to defend yourself. You travel light and fast, and want light arms like daggers and short swords. You don't want to get into a slugging match, so you want the marksman's weapons. The bow, crossbow, throwing star, and dart. You want light armor, so you can keep moving, and moving fast. Why belong? Simple. Everybody needs friends. The help of friends includes information. Your friends at the Thieves Guild know where the action is, and where the action is safe, and where it is not. The help of friends includes a place to rest, and a place to buy supplies and services, training and tools. The help of friends includes fixing things with the guards at a discount rate. That's where the Honor Among Thieves part comes in. Friends stick together and help each other. But what about the competition, my admirers ask? The competition is the Kimono Tong, and you don't want to join them because they don't want you. They have this thing about Outlanders. They want them all dead. So, unless your ambition is to be dead, you don't want to join them. And the Kimono Tong are bad people. The Kimono Tong don't mind killing people. Heck, they like killing people. The Thieves Guild, on the other hand, thinks killing people is bad business. You want to be good people, right? So join the Thieves Guild and stay far, far away from the Kimono Tong. So you want to join, but where do you look? Being a thief is not like being a fighter. You don't just go to the local guild hall. The Thieves Guild doesn't have guild halls. But thieves like to be where their friends are. And where are their friends? At the local corner club or trade house. In Vardenfell, look for friends in Balmora, Aldrune, Sadrith Mora, and the foreign quarter of Vivec. Very good. Excuse me, Habasi. There's a book down here. Yes. Hi.
Speak freely, friend.
Okay, I'm gonna read now. The Balladeer's Fakebook. This portfolio contains the lyrics to many popular Western drinking songs, including, among others, Bold Admiral Richton, The Golden Grove, The 12-Night Drunk, Island Lads Down from the Mountain, Beans Bloody Beans, Olga's Smicket, Black Fredas, The Imperial Volunteer, Down by the Ginger Garden, Roll Bretonia Roll, The Isle of Somerset, Dark-Blooded Foes, Dawn and Dusk, Farewell to Colovia, Wind and Rain, Green and Gracious Land, The Jolly Archer, Sorrow Waters, Inkit Hinkit, Pilgrim on the Road, I'm Glad I'm Not No Orc. Those would have been better in Texan. I'm glad I'm not no orc.
Your turn to talk. Ours to listen.
Okay, bye everybody.
Greetings,
Oh, and then
friend.
farewell. Farewell. Bye.
I'm
No.
listening Today.
Okay. Phew. Let's see. Next, we want to go to Nine Toes' house. I think that's here. Yeah. And head upstairs. Let's read this. A Dance in Fire, Chapter 3, by Wowan Jarth. Mother Pascost disappeared into the sordid hole that was her tavern, and emerged a moment later with a scrap of paper with Laertes Juris's familiar scrawl. Decumus Scotty held it up before a patch of sunlight that had found its way through the massive boughs of the Tree City, and read, Scotty, so you made it to Falinesti Valenwood. Congratulations. I'm sure you had quite an adventure getting here. Unfortunately, I'm not here anymore, as you probably guess. There's a town downriver called Athy I'm at. Get a boat and join me. It's ideal. I hope you brought a lot of contracts, because these people need a lot of building done. They were close to the war, you see, but not so close they don't have any money left to pay. Meet me down here as soon as you can. Juris. So, Scotty pondered, Juris had left Falinesti and gone to some place called Athy. Given his poor penmanship and ghastly spelling, it could equally well be Athy, Affy, Authry, Imthry, Eartha, or Crackamaca. The sensible thing to do, Scotty knew, was to call this adventure over and try to find some way to get back home to the Imperial City. He was no mercenary devoted to a life of thrills. He was, or at least had been, a senior clerk at a successful private building commission. Over the last few weeks, he had been robbed by the Cathay Rot, taken on a death march through the jungle by a gang of giggling Bosmeri, half-starved to death, drugged with fermented pig's milk, nearly slain by some kind of giant tick, and attacked by archers. He was filthy, exhausted, and had, he counted, 10 gold pieces to his name. Now, the man whose proposal brought him to the depths of misery was not even there. It was both judicious and seemly to abandon the enterprise entirely. And yet, a small but distinct voice in his head told him, You have been chosen. You have no other choice but to see this through. Scotty turned to the stout old woman, Mother Pascost, who had been watching him curiously. I was wondering if you knew of a village that was at the edge of the recent conflict with Elsewhere. It's called something like Athy? You must mean Athay, she grinned. My middle lad, Viglil. He manages a dairy down there. Beautiful country, right on the river. Is that where your friend went? Yes, said Scotty. Do you know the fastest way to get there? After a short conversation, an even shorter ride to Falinesti's roots by way of the platforms, and a jog to the riverbank, Scotty was negotiating transport with a huge, fair-haired Bosmer with a face like a pickled carp. He called himself Captain Balfix, but even Scotty with his sheltered life could recognize him for what he was. A retired pirate for hire, a smuggler for certain, and probably much worse. His ship, which had clearly been stolen in the distant past, was a bent old Imperial sloop. 50 gold, and we'll be in Athay in 2 days' time, boomed Captain Balfix expansively. I have 9 gold pieces, replied Scotty, and feeling the need for explanation, added, I had 10, but I gave one to the platform ferryman to get me down here. 9 is just as fine, said the captain agreeably. Truth be told, I was going to Athay whether you paid me or not. Make yourself comfortable on the boat. We'll be leaving in just a few minutes. Decumus Scotty boarded the vessel, which sat low in the water of the river, stacked high with crates and sacks that spilled out of the hold and galley and onto the deck. Each was marked with stamps advertising the most innocuous substances. Copper scraps, lard, ink, high rock meal marked for cattle, tar, fish jelly. Scotty's imagination reeled picturing what sorts of illicit imports were truly aboard. It took more than those few minutes for Captain Balfix to haul in the rest of his cargo, but in an hour, the anchor was up and they were sailing downriver towards Athe. The green-gray water barely rippled, only touched by the fingers of the breeze. Lush plant life crowded the banks, obscuring from sight all the animals that sang and roared at one another. Lulled by the serene surroundings, GotY drifted to sleep. At night, he awoke and gratefully accepted some clean clothes and food from Captain Balfix. "Why are you going to Athe, if I may ask?" queried the Bosmer. "I'm meeting a former colleague there. He asked me to come down from the Imperial city where I worked for the Atreus Building Commission to negotiate some contracts." GotY took another bite of the dried sausages they were sharing for dinner. "We're going to try to repair and refurbish whatever bridges, roads, and other structures that got damaged in the recent war with the Khajiit." "It's been a hard 2 years," the captain nodded his head. "Though I suppose good for me, and the likes of you and your friend. Trade routes cut off. Now they think there's going to be war with the Somerset Isles. You heard that?" GotY shook his head. "I've done my share of smuggling skooma down the coast, even helping some revolutionary types escape the Maine's wrath. But now the wars have made me a legitimate trader, a businessman. The first casualties of war is always the corrupted." GotY said he was sorry to hear that, and they lapsed into silence, watching the stars and moon's reflection on the still water. The next day, GotY woke to find the captain wrapped up in his sail, torpid from alcohol, singing in a low, slurred voice. When he saw GotY rise, he offered his flagon of Jaga. "I learned my lesson during revelry at Western Cross." The captain laughed, and then burst into tears. "I don't want to be legitimate. Other pirates I used to know were still raping and stealing and smuggling and selling nice folk like you into slavery. I swear to you, I never thought the first time that I ran a real shipment of legal goods that my life would turn out like this. Oh, I know, I could go back to it, but Bandar knows not after all I've seen. I'm a ruined man." GotY helped the weeping Mer out of the sail, murmuring words of reassurance. Then he added, "Forgive me for changing the subject, but where are we?" Moaned Captain Balfix miserably. "We made good time. Athe's right around the bend in the river." "Then it looks like Athe's on fire," said GotY, pointing. A great plume of smoke, black as pitch, was rising above the trees. As they drifted around the bend, they next saw the flames, and then the blackened skeletal remains of the village. Dying, blazing villagers leapt from rocks into the river. A cacophony of wailing met their ears, and they could see, roaming along the edges of the town, the figures of Khajiit soldiers bearing torches. "Bandar bless me," slurred the captain. "The war's back on." "Oh no," whimpered GotY. The sloop drifted with the current toward the opposite shore, away from the fiery town. GotY turned his attention there, and the sanctuary it offered. Just a peaceful arbor, away from the horror. There was a shudder of leaves in 2 of the trees, and a dozen lithe Khajiit dropped to the ground, armed with bows. "They see us," hissed GotY. "And they've got bows." "Well, of course they have bows," snarled Captain Balfix. "We Bosmer may have invented the bloody things, but we didn't think to keep them secret, you bloody bureaucrat." "Now they're setting their arrows on fire." They do that sometimes." "Captain, they're shooting at us. They're shooting at us with flaming arrows." So they are," the captain agreed. "The aim here is to avoid being hit." But hit they were, and very shortly thereafter. Even worse, the second volley of arrows hit the supply of pitch, which ignited in a tremendous blue blaze. GotY grabbed Captain Balfix and they leapt overboard just before the ship and all its cargo disintegrated. The shock of the cold water brought the Bosmer into temporary sobriety. He called to GotY, who was already swimming as fast as he could toward the bend. "Master Decumus, where do you think you're swimming to?" "Back to Falinesti," cried GotY. "It will take you days, and by the time you get there, everyone will know about the attack on Athe. They'll never let anyone they don't know in. The closest village downriver is Grenos. Maybe they'll give us shelter." GotY swam back to the captain, and side by side they began paddling in the middle of the river, past the burning residuum of the village. He thanked Mara that he had learned to swim. Many a Cyrodiil did not, as largely landlocked as the Imperial province was. Had he been raised in Mir Corrup or Artemon, he might have been doomed, but the Imperial city itself was encircled by water, and every lad and lass there knew how to cross without a boat, even those who grew up to be clerks and not adventurers. Captain Balfix's sobriety faded as he grew used to the water's temperature. Even in wintertide, the Xylo River was fairly temperate and, after a fashion, even comfortable. The Bosmer's strokes were uneven, and he'd stray closer to GotY and then further away, pushing ahead and then falling behind. GotY looked to the shore to his right. The flames had caught the trees like tinder. Behind them was an inferno with which they were barely keeping pace. To the shore on their left, all looked fair until he saw a tremble in the river reeds, and then what caused it. A pride of the largest cats he had ever seen. They were auburn-haired, green-eyed beasts with jaws and teeth to match his wildest nightmares. And they were watching the two swimmers and keeping pace. "Captain Balfix, we can't go to either that shore or the other one, or we'll be parboiled or eaten," Scotty whispered. "Try to even your kicking and your strokes. Breathe like you would normally. If you're feeling tired, tell me, and we'll float on our backs for a while." Anyone who has had the experience of giving rational advice to a drunkard would understand the hopelessness. Scotty kept pace with the captain, slowing himself, quickening, drifting left and right, while the Bosmer moaned old ditties from his pirate days. When he wasn't watching his companion, he watched the cats on the shore. After a stretch, he turned to his right. Another village had caught fire. Undoubtedly, it was Grenos. Scotty stared at the blazing fury, awed by the sight of the destruction, and did not hear that the captain had ceased to sing. When he turned back, Captain Balfix was gone. Scotty dove into the murky depths of the river over and over again. There was nothing to be done. When he surfaced after his final search, he saw that the giant cats had moved on, perhaps assuming that he too had drowned. He continued his lonely swim downriver. A tributary, he noted, had formed a final barrier, keeping the flames from spreading further, but there were no more towns. After several hours, he began to ponder the wisdom of going ashore. Which shore was the question? He was spared the decision. Ahead of him was a rocky island with a bonfire. He did not know if he were intruding on a party of Bosmeri or Khajiit, only that he could swim no more. With straining, aching muscles, he pulled himself onto the rocks. They were Bosmer refugees, he gathered, even before they told him. Roasting over the fire was the remains of one of the giant cats that had been stalking him through the jungle on the opposite shore. "Sensei tiger," said one of the young warriors ravenously. "It's no animal. It's as smart as any Cathay Rod or Omez or any other bleeding Khajiit. Pity this one drowned. I would have gladly killed it. You'll like the meat, though. Sweet from all the sugar these asses eat." Scotty did not know if he was capable of eating a creature as intelligent as a man or mer, but he surprised himself, as he had done several times over the last days. It was rich, succulent, and sweet, like sugared pork, but no seasonings had been added. He surveyed the crowd as he ate. A sad lot, some still weeping for lost family members. They were the survivors of both the villages of Grenos and Athe, and war was on every person's lips. Why had the Khajiit attacked again? Why, specifically directed at Scotty as a Cyrodiil, why was the Emperor not enforcing peace in his provinces? "I was to meet another Cyrodiil," he said to a Bosmer maiden who he understood to be from Athe. "His name was Laides Juris. I don't suppose you know what might have happened to him." "I don't know, your friend, but there were many Cyrodiils in Athe when the fire came," said the girl. "Some of them, I think, left quickly. They were going to Vindizi, inland, in the jungle. I am going there tomorrow. So are many of us. If you wish, you may come as well." Decumus Scotty nodded solemnly. He made himself as comfortable as he could in the stony ground of the river island, and somehow, after much effort, he fell asleep. But he did not sleep well. Oh, poor Captain Balfix. He sounded fun.
Such fine company, one would be wise to listen.
Indeed. All right, next, we want to get back into Balin Omavel's house, which is labeled Balin Omarel's house. Uh-oh. Well, that's not how you do it. That's not how you do it at all. Let's try that again. Maybe from over here. There we go. Yeah, I kind of overshot that, huh? Okay, so you had a book right here. Incident in Necrom by Jonkia Bothi. "The situation simply is this," said Flaxith, his face as chiseled and resolute as any statue. "Everyone knows that the cemetery west of the city is haunted by some malevolent beings, and has been for many years now. The people have come to accept it. They bury their dead by daylight, and are away before Masser and Secunda have risen and the evil comes forth. The only victims to fall prey to the devils within are the very stupid and the outsiders." It sounds like a natural solution to filtering out the undesirables then, laughed Nitra, a tall, middle-aged woman with cold eyes and thin lips. Where is the Golden saving them? From the temple. They're reopening a new monastery near the cemetery, and they need the land cleansed of evil. They're offering a fortune, so I accepted the assignment with the caveat that I could assemble my own team to split the reward. That's why I've sought you each out. From what I've heard, you, Nitra, are the best bladesman in Morrowind. Nitra smiled her unpleasant best. And you, Osmic, are a renowned burglar, though never once imprisoned. The bald-pated young man stammered as if to refute the charges, before grinning back, I'll get you in where you need to go, but then it's up to you to do what you need to do. I'm no combatter. Anything Nitra and I can't handle, I'm sure Massitha will prove her mettle, Flaxith said, turning to the fourth member of the party. She comes on very good references as a sorceress of great power and skill. Massitha was the picture of innocence, round-faced and wide-eyed. Nitra and Osmic looked at her uncertainly, particularly watching her fearful expressions as Flaxith described the nature of the creatures haunting the cemetery. It was obvious she had never faced any adversary other than man and mer before. If she survived, they thought to themselves, it would be very surprising. As the foursome trudged toward the graveyard at dusk, they took the opportunity to quiz their new teammate. Vampires are filthy creatures, said Nitra. Disease-ridden, you know. They say off to the west, they'll indiscriminately pass on their curse together with a number of other afflictions. They don't do that here so much, but still, you don't want to leave their wounds untreated. I take it you know something of the spells of restoration if one of us gets bit? I know a little, but I'm no healer, said Massitha meekly. More of a battle mage? Asked Osmic. I can do a little damage if I'm really close, but I'm not very good at that either. I'm more of an illusionist, technically. Nitra and Osmic looked at one another with naked concern as they reached the gates of the graveyard. There were moving shadows, stray specters among the rackened ruins, crumbled paths stacked on top of crumbled paths. It wasn't a maze of a place. It could have been any dilapidated graveyard, but even without looking at the tombstones, it did have one very noticeable feature. Filling the horizon was the mausoleum of a minor Cyrodiilic official from the Second Era, slightly exotic, but still harmonizing with the Dunmer grades in a complementary style called Decay. It's a surprisingly useful school, whispered Massitha defensively. You see, it's all concerned with Magicka's ability to alter the perception of objects without changing their physical compositions. Removing sensual data, for example, to cast darkness or remove sound or smell from the air. It can help by... A red-haired vampire woman leapt out of the shadows in front of them, knocking Flaxith on his back. Nitra quickly unsheathed her sword, but Massitha was faster. With a wave of her hand, the creature stopped, frozen, her jaws scant inches from Flaxith's throat. Flaxith pulled out his own blade and finished her off. That's illusion? Asked Osmic. Certainly, smiled Massitha. Nothing changed in the vampire's form except its ability to move. Like I said, it's a very useful school. The four climbed up over the paths to the front gateway to the crypt. Osmic snapped the lock and disassembled the poison trap. The sorceress cast a wave of light down the dust-choked corridors, banishing the shadows and drawing the inhabitants out. Almost immediately they were set on by a pair of vampires, howling and screaming in a frenzy of bloodlust. The battle was joined, so no sooner were the first two vampires felled than their reinforcements attacked. They were mighty warriors of uncanny strength and endurance, but Massitha's paralysis spell and the weaponry of Flaxith and Nitra clove through their ranks. Even Osmic aided the battle. They're crazy, gasped Massitha when the fight finally ended and she could catch her breath. Quara, the most savage of the vampire bloodlines, said Flaxith. We have to find and exterminate each and every one. Delving into the crypts, the group hounded out more of the creatures. Though they varied in appearance, each seemed to rely on their strength and claws for attacking, and subtlety did not seem to be the style of any. When the entire mausoleum had been searched and every creature within destroyed, the four finally made their way to the surface. It was only an hour until sunrise. There was no frenzied scream or howl. Nothing rushed forward towards them. The final attack, when it happened, was so unlike the others that the questers were taken utterly by surprise. The ancient creature waited until the four were almost out of the cemetery, talking amiably, making plans for spending their share of the reward. He judged carefully who would be the greatest threat, and then launched himself at the sorceress. Had Flaxith not turned his attention back from the gate, she would have been ripped to shreds before she had a chance to scream. The vampire knocked Massitha across a stone, its claws raking across her back. but stopped its assault in order to block a blow from Flaxith's sword. It accomplished this maneuver in its own brutal way by tearing the warrior's arm from its socket. Osmic and Nitra set on it, but they found themselves in a losing battle. Only when Masitha had pulled herself back up from behind the pile of rocks, weak and bleeding, that the fight turned. She cast a magical ball of flame at the creature, which so enraged it that it turned back to her. Nitra saw her opening and took it, beheading the vampire with a stroke of her sword. "So you do know some spells of destruction, like you said," Nitra. "And a few spells of healing, too," she said weakly. "But I can't save Flaxith." The warrior died in the bloodied dust before them. The three were quiet as they traveled across the dawnlit countryside back toward Necrom. Masitha felt the throb of pain on her back intensify as they walked, and then a gradual numbness like ice spread through her body. "I need to go to a healer and see if I've been diseased," she said as they reached the city. "Meet us at the Moth and Fire tomorrow morning," said Nitra. "We'll go to the temple and get our reward, and split it there." 3 hours later, Osmic and Nitra sat in their room at the tavern, happily counting and recounting the gold marks. Split 3 ways, it was a very comfortable sum. "What if the healers can't do anything for Masitha?" smiled Osmic dreamily. "Some diseases can be insidious." "Did you hear something in the hall?" asked Nitra quickly, but when she looked, there was no one there. She returned, shutting the door behind her. "I'm sure Masitha will survive if she went straight to the healer, but we could leave tonight with the gold." "Let's have one last drink to our poor sorceress," said Osmic, leading Nitra out of the room toward the stairs down. Nitra laughed. "Those spells of illusion won't help her track us down, as useful as she keeps saying they are. Paralysis, light, silence. Not so good when you don't know where to look." They closed the door behind them. "Invisibility is another spell of illusion," said Masitha's disembodied voice. The gold on the table rose in the air and vanished from sight as she slipped it into her purse. The door again opened and closed, and all was silent until Osmic and Nitra returned a few minutes later. "Ooh, snacky thief mage. Snacky thief mage." And now we're going to go into Caius Cosades' place. Let's read this.
Well, hello there. A pleasure to meet you.
Caius, we've already met. We had a very extensive conversation. So that's a weird thing to say, but alright, whatever. The War of the First Council. This account by the Imperial scholar Agrippa Fundilius is based on various Imperial and Dunmer sources and written for Western readers. The War of the First Council was a First-Age religious conflict between the secular Dunmer houses Dwemer and Dagoth and the Orthodox Dunmer houses Indoril, Redoran, Drez, Hlalu, and Telvanni. The First Council was the first pan-Dunmer governing body, which collapsed over disputes about sorceries and enchantments practiced by the Dwemer and declared profane by the other houses. The secular houses, less numerous but politically and magically more advanced, and aided by Nord and Orc clans drawn by promise of land and booty, initially campaigned with great success in the north of Morrowind and occupied much of the land now comprising Redoran, Vardenfell, and Telvanni district. The Orthodox houses, widely dispersed and poorly organized, suffered defeat after defeat until Nerevar was made general of all house troops and levies. Nerevar secured the aid of nomad barbarian tribesmen and contrived to force a major battle at the secular stronghold of Red Mountain on Vardenfell. The secular forces were outmaneuvered and defeated with the help of Ashlander scouts, and the survivors forced to take refuge in the Dwemer stronghold at Red Mountain. After a brief siege, treason permitted Nerevar and his troops to enter the stronghold, where the secular leaders were slain and Nerevar mortally wounded. General slaughter followed, and houses Dwemer and Dagoth were exterminated. Nerevar died shortly thereafter of his wounds. 3 of Nerevar's associates among the Orthodox houses, Vivec, Almalexia, and Sothasil, succeeded to control of the recreated First Council, renamed the Grand Council of Morrowind, and went on to become the God Kings and immortal rulers of Morrowind, known as the Tribunal, or Almcivi. That's some pretty helpful background info. Okay, let's go find the last book that Fedar is going to read for right now.
May each day greet you warmly, friend.
Thank you. I'm going to read your book, Rithleen. Excuse me. The Mirror by Berdier Renz. The wind blew over the open plain, jostling the few trees within to move back and forth with the irritation of it. A young man in bright green turban approached the army and gave his chieftain's terms for peace to the commander. He was refused. It was to be battle, the Battle of Aen Kolar. So the chief Imbes had decreed his open defiance, and his horsemen were at war once again. Many times the tribe had moved into territory that was not theirs to occupy, and many times the diplomatic approach had failed. It had come to this at long last. It was just as well with Mindothrax. His allies may win or lose, but he would always survive. Though he had occasionally been on the losing side of a war, never once in all his 34 years had he lost in hand-to-hand combat. The two armies poured like dual frothing streams through the dust, and when they met, a clamor rang out, echoing into the hills. Blood, the first liquor the clay had tasted in many a month, danced like powder. The high and low battle cries of the rival tribes met in harmony as the armies dug into one another's flesh. Mindothrax was in the element he loved. After 10 hours of fighting with no ground given, both commanders called a mutual and honorable withdrawal from the field. The camp was positioned in a high-walled garden of an old burial ground, adorned by springtide blossoms. As Mindothrax toured the grounds, he was reminded of his childhood home. It was a happy and a sad recollection, the purity of childhood ambition, all of his schooling in the ways of battle, but tinged with memories of his poor mother. A beautiful woman looking down at her son with both pride and unspoken sorrow. She never talked about what troubled her, but it came as no surprise to any when she took the walk across the moors and was found, days later, her throat slit open by her own hand. The army itself was like a colony of ants, newly shaken. Within a half-hour's time after the end of the battle, they had reorganized as if by instinct. As the medicos looked to the wounded, someone remarked, with a measure of admiration and astonishment, "Look at Mindothrax. His hair isn't even out of place." "He is a mighty swordsman," said the attending physician. "The sword is a greatly overvalued article," said Mindothrax, nevertheless pleased with the attention. "Warriors pay too much attention to striking, and not enough in defending strikes. The proper way to go into battle is to defend yourself, and to hit your opponent only when the ideal moment arises." "I prefer a more straightforward approach," smiled one of the wounded. "It is the way of the horseman." "If it is the way of the Julse tribes to fail, then I renounce my heritage," said Mindothrax, making a quick sign to the spirits that he was being expressive, not blasphemous. "Remember what the great blade master Gaiden Shinji said. The best techniques are passed on by the survivors. I have been in 36 battles, and I haven't a scar to show for them. That is because I rely on my shield and then my blade, in that order." "What is your secret?" "Think of melee as a mirror. I look to my opponent's left arm when I am striking with my right. If he is prepared to block my blow, I blow not. Why exert undue force?" Mindothrax cocked an eyebrow. "But when I see his right arm tense, my left arm goes to my shield. You see, it takes twice as much power to send force than it does to deflect it. When your eye can recognize whether your opponent is striking from above, or at an angle, or in an uppercut from below, you learn to pivot and place your shield just so to protect yourself. I could block for hours if need be, but it only takes a few minutes, or even seconds, for your opponent, used to battering, to leave a space open for your own strike." "What was the longest you've ever had to defend yourself?" asked the wounded man. "I fought a man once for an hour's time," said Mindothrax. "He was tireless with his bludgeoning, never giving me a moment to do aught but block his strikes. But finally, he took a moment too long in raising his cudgel, and I found my mark in his chest. He struck my shield 1,000 times, and I struck his heart but once. But that was enough." "So he was your greatest opponent?" asked the medico. "Oh, indeed not," said Mindothrax, turning his great shield so the silvery metal reflected his own face. "There is he." The next day, the battle recommenced. Chief Imbes had brought in reinforcements from the islands to the south. To the horror and disgrace of the tribe, mercenaries, renegade horsemen, and even some reachmen witches were included in the war. As Mindothrax stared across the field at the armies assembling, putting on his helmet and readying his shield and blade, he thought again of his poor mother. What had tortured her so? Why had she never been able to look at her son without grief? Between sunrise and sundown, the battle raged. A bright blue sky overhead burned down on the combatants as they rushed against one another over and over again. In every melee, Mindothrax prevailed. A foe with an axe rained a series of strokes against his shield, but every one was deflected until at last Mindothrax could best the warrior. A spear maiden nearly pierced the shield with her first strike, but Mindothrax knew how to give with the blow, throwing her off balance and leaving her open for his counterstrike. Finally, he met a mercenary on the field, armed with shield and sword and a helm of golden bronze. For an hour and a half they battled. Mindothrax tried every trick he knew. When the mercenary tensed his left arm, he held back his strike. When his opponent rose his sword, his shield rose too and expertly blocked. For the first time in his life, he was battling another defensive fighter. Stationary, reflective, with energy to battle for days if need be. Occasionally, another warrior would enter into the fray, sometimes from Mindothrax's army, sometimes from his opponent's. These distractions were swiftly dispatched, and the champions returned to their fight. As they fought, circling one another, matching block for blow and blow for block, it dawned on Mindothrax that here at last he was fighting the perfect mirror. It became more a game, almost a dance, than a battle of blood. It was not until Mindothrax missed his own step, striking too soon, throwing himself off balance, that the promenade was ended. He saw, rather than felt, the mercenary's blade rip across him from throat to chest. A good strike, the sort he himself might have delivered. Mindothrax fell to the ground, feeling his life passing. The mercenary stood over him, prepared to give his worthy adversary the killing blow. It was a strange, honorable deed for an outsider to do, and Mindothrax was greatly moved. Across the battlefield, he heard someone call a name similar to his own. Jurifax. The mercenary removed his helmet to answer the call. As he did so, Mindothrax saw through the slits of his helmet his own reflection in the man. It was his own close-set eyes, red and brown hair, thin and white mouth, and blunt chin. For a moment he marveled at the mirror, before the stranger turned back to him and delivered the death stroke. Jurifax returned to his commander and was well paid for his part in the day's victory. They retired for a hot meal under the stars in a garden by an old cairn that had previously been occupied by their foes. The mercenary was strangely quiet as he observed the land. "Have you been here before, Jurifax?" asked one of the tribesmen who had hired him. "I was born a horseman, just like you. My mother sold me when I was just a babe. I have always wondered how my life might have been different had I not been bartered away. I might never have been a mercenary." "There are many things that decide our fate," said the witch. "It is madness to try to see how you might have taken this turn or that in the world. There are none exactly like yourself, so it is foolish to compare." "But there is one," said Jurifax, looking to the stars. "My master, before he set me free, said that my mother had twin sons when I was born. She could only afford to raise but one child, but somewhere out there is a man just like me, my brother. I hope to meet him." The witch saw the spirits before her and knew the truth that the twins had met already. She remained silent and stared into the fire, banishing the thoughts from her head, too wise to tell all.
If I ever see that elf, he's in so much trouble.
"To which elf are you?" "All right, it's time to leave before Fedar gets plague. Just wear the mask." And it would appear that Fedar's athletics skill has increased to 32, because he's been running around all over the place to read books. And speaking of those books, we just read On Morrowind, the Imperial Province, Provinces of Tamriel, the Book of Daedra.
Wealth beyond measure.
Pleasant weather, don't you think?
Yeah, the weather's lovely, thanks.
Yes, Outlander. What do you want?
I want to keep reading my list. Lady Benoch's Words and Philosophy, The Mystery of Princess Talara, Part 3, The Consolations of Prayer, Varieties of Faith in the Empire. Now let's just get past everybody here.
I suppose I have a moment. What is it?
The True Nobles Code, Guylaine's Architecture of the Second Empire, The Eastern Provinces Impartially Considered, The Black Glove, The 36 Lessons of Vivec, Sermon 34, The Homilies of Blessed Almalexia, The 36 Lessons of Vivec, Sermon 14, Fellowship of the Temple, The Doors of the Spirit, The Warrior's Charge, The 36 Lessons of Vivec, Sermon 20, Honor Among Thieves, The Balladeer's Fakebook, A Dance in Fire, Chapter 3, Incident in Necrom, The War of the First Council, and The Mirror. Whew. Well, now, I'm going to go ahead and put the books that Fedar took out of this chest back into it, starting with On Morrowind. Oh, it won't fit in there. Of course not, because that would be too easy. And Provinces of Tamriel, and the Book of Daedra. Well, now that Fedar's all caught up with his reading, he needs to head to Arkingthand, and he'll do that in the next video. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.